Welcome to this quiet corner of time, where the noise of the modern world fades away and only the voice of the earth remains. Before we begin, take a deep breath and let your mind slow down. If you enjoy exploring the gentle stories of our planet, the ones written in stone, wind, and light, make sure to like this video and subscribe. 1 million years ago, Earth turned beneath a quieter sky. The planet was entering a long age of ice, a cycle of cold and thaw that would shape mountains, carve valleys, and decide the future of every living thing. The sun was the same, yet its warmth reached the surface differently. Light scattered through colder air, painting the world in soft silver tones. Across the northern continents, snow and ice stretched farther than the eye could follow. Vast glaciers, taller than cities, moved slowly across the land. They crept forward a few inches each day, grinding stone into dust, polishing the earth into smooth plains. When they finally paused, the frozen silence was so complete that even the wind seemed to hesitate. The temperature across much of the world was several degrees lower than it is today. Winters were longer, harsher, and more patient. In the far north, almost nothing grew. The ground remained frozen year-round, and the horizon was a pale blue line where ice met sky. Yet this stillness was not emptiness. Beneath the surface, rivers of meltwater flowed through hidden tunnels, echoing softly as they carried minerals and sediment toward the sea. If you had stood there then, you would have felt the power of time pressing down from every direction. The ground beneath your feet would have hummed faintly with the weight of glaciers miles thick. Each gust of wind would have carried the clean scent of frost and stone. The world had no cities, no metal, no voices of engines or machines. It was a place ruled by temperature, by distance, by the quiet balance of light and gravity. To the south, the story softened. The tropics still shimmered with heat and moisture. Rain fell in sheets over green forests, feeding rivers that wound lazily toward the ocean. Africa was warm and bright, its savannas stretching beneath an open sky filled with dust and sun. There, herds of ancient animals grazed among acacia trees, and early humans walked upright through tall grass. They did not know that the rest of the planet was locked in ice. Their world was smaller, closer, filled with the smell of rain and soil and the sound of insects droning through endless afternoons. Between the frozen poles and the living equator lay a middle world, a vast temperate zone where forests of birch and pine struggled through cold seasons and brief summers. Lakes formed in the shadows of retreating glaciers, shining like mirrors against the gray landscape. The air was thin but clean. Birds followed the rhythm of the seasons, migrating thousands of miles between warmth and cold, tracing invisible paths that would guide their descendants for 1 million years. Mammoths moved slowly across the plains, their heavy fur rippling in the wind. Bison and reindeer grazed behind them, followed by wolves whose paws left dark prints in the snow. When the short summer came, tundra flowers opened for a few fleeting weeks, scattering color against the white. Then, as the sun drifted south again, frost returned, and the world exhaled into silence once more. From space, the Earth of this time looked familiar yet strange. The continents rested roughly where they are today, but their outlines were sharper, their edges expanded by lower seas. The oceans glowed a deeper blue, trimmed by broad shelves of ice. Clouds swirled above them in slow, elegant spirals, marking the breath of storms that lasted for months. The poles gleamed bright and immense, while the equator pulsed with green and gold. It was a planet balanced on the edge of change, caught between heat and cold, between the memory of fire and the promise of frost. 1 million years ago, Earth was not waiting for humans. It was simply being, alive, vast, and endlessly patient. Every glacier, every gust of wind, every stone resting beneath the snow was part of the same slow heartbeat. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it still, somewhere beneath the noise of our present world, the quiet rhythm of a planet that once slept beneath endless ice and endless time. The air 1 million years ago was colder, cleaner, and sharper than the air we breathe today. Each breath would have carried a faint chill, the crisp taste of ice and untouched soil. The atmosphere was not so different in composition, still rich in nitrogen and oxygen, but the balance of gases was slightly altered by the rhythms of glaciation. Carbon dioxide levels were far lower, hovering around 180 parts per million, a fraction of what they are now. That difference alone was enough to tip the world into its long freeze. The sky above was thinner, clearer, and often painted in subtle hues of gray and white. On certain days, high cirrus clouds drifted like streaks of crystal dust, scattering sunlight into faint halos. On others, heavy snow clouds rolled across the horizon, muffling the world in silence. To stand under that sky was to feel the planet breathing slowly, its exhalations visible in the mist that rose from every living creature. The wind carried stories across continents. In the north, it blew cold from the ice sheets, sweeping fine powder across open plains and shaping dunes of snow that shifted like waves upon land. Farther south, it gathered warmth and dust, crossing deserts that stretched wider than they do now. Each gust traveled miles before meeting forests of pine, where it whispered through frozen needles with a low, steady sigh. There was no noise pollution, no hum of human life, only the sound of air moving across stone and branch. In the evenings, when the sun slipped below the edge of the glaciers, the atmosphere blushed with color. The sky turned deep amber, then violet, then black, scattered with more stars than the modern eye can see. The auroras, born of the planet's magnetic breath, rippled constantly at the poles. Curtains of green and blue light flickered across the horizon, shimmering like thoughts drifting through the mind of the world itself. The cycle of temperature was not consistent. Even within the long chill of the Ice Age, the planet swayed between colder and milder phases. Some centuries saw the ice creeping farther south, swallowing valleys and forests. Others brought brief thaws, where the land awakened, rivers surged, and flowers bloomed in the pale warmth. The air shifted subtly during these times, carrying the smell of wet earth and melting frost. In those moments, life surged forward, taking advantage of the temporary kindness. Herds of animals migrated northward, following the retreating edge of the ice. Birds filled the air with movement, their wings flashing silver in the weak sunlight. The planet was breathing in and out, frozen breath followed by a sigh of warmth. These changes came slowly, almost imperceptibly to the creatures living through them. But over the course of thousands of years, they sculpted the face of Earth, leaving marks still visible in the scars of rock and the patterns of soil. In the southern hemisphere, the atmosphere danced to a slightly different rhythm. The glaciers there, though smaller, still held vast power. In South America, the Andes wore crowns of ice that fed mighty rivers below. Australia, meanwhile, was drier, its interior more barren, its coasts lined with forests and grasslands that shimmered under a milder sun. The winds from Antarctica swept north across the Southern Ocean, bringing storms that shaped the climate of the southern continents. Everywhere, air and ice worked together like artists, one carving, the other smoothing, creating landscapes that would cradle future generations of life. Above them all, the atmosphere continued its silent work, balancing gases, reflecting sunlight, and protecting the fragile world beneath from the cold of space. If you were to breathe that ancient air now, you might find it startlingly pure. There were no traces of industry, no scent of smoke, no haze of pollution. The sky stretched endlessly, its clarity revealing the curvature of the world itself. The Earth of 1 million years ago lived in equilibrium, its atmosphere stable, its temperature held steady by the slow dance of oceans and ice. Every gust of wind, every breath drawn by a creature, every fall of snow was part of a system so intricate, so perfect, that it continued unchanged for millennia. The air itself was an archive, a record of time suspended within its frozen heart. Scientists today can still read it, trapped inside bubbles of ancient ice, listening to the whispers of the world as it once was. And as those tiny pockets of atmosphere reveal their secrets, we are reminded of how delicate our balance truly is and how the Earth, even in its coldest silence, never stopped breathing. 1 million years ago, the land beneath the cold sky was alive with movement that could not be seen in a single lifetime. Continents drifted slowly across the face of the planet, pulled by invisible forces deep within the mantle. Though they had already found their familiar shapes, they were still adjusting, still searching for balance. North America pressed gradually westward. South America slid slightly north, locked in its long embrace with the Pacific. Africa drifted toward Europe, its northern edge beginning to buckle into mountain chains that would someday grow into the Alps. Across the ocean, the Himalayas continued their rise, inch by inch, as India pushed against the belly of Asia. To the north, the vast Siberian plains were locked in ice, their soil frozen solid for thousands of years at a time. Every mountain, every valley, every island that existed then was still being written by tectonic hands. Beneath the surface, magma moved like thick, glowing honey, reshaping the crust through slow waves of heat. Volcanic eruptions were frequent, but time softened their violence. A single eruption might bury a valley beneath ash, then feed it with minerals that allowed life to return stronger than before. The Earth, in its endless patience, destroyed only to create again. In North America, glaciers covered most of Canada and crept into what is now the northern United States. They carved the Great Lakes, scooping basins that would later fill with meltwater as the world warmed. Each movement of the ice was an act of design. Rocks the size of houses were pushed hundreds of miles, ground smooth by pressure and time. When the ice retreated, it left behind ridges of gravel, flat plains, and deep scars in the bedrock. In Europe, the same was happening. Scandinavia lay under sheets of ice that reached 2 miles thick. As they advanced and withdrew, they shaped the landscape we know today: fjords, cliffs, and valleys that now cradle quiet towns and forests. Farther south, rivers swelled with meltwater, carving channels that wound through what would become France, Germany, and Poland. The rivers of that age were colder, clearer, and more violent, carrying crushed rock and frozen sediment toward the sea. Asia told another story. The mountains there rose higher with each passing century. The Himalayas were young and raw, their peaks sharper, their slopes unstable. Avalanches thundered through valleys that no human would see for another 900,000 years. The Tibetan Plateau, already towering above much of the world, influenced the climate of the entire continent. It created winds that shaped monsoons, controlling rainfall across India and Southeast Asia. Volcanoes dotted the Indonesian archipelago, glowing red against the night. To the east, Japan sat on a restless edge of the Pacific Plate, its land trembling often, its mountains built from fire. Each quake, each eruption, each storm added a line to the planet's slow and endless script. Africa, though warmer, was just as restless beneath the surface. The Great Rift Valley, a scar stretching thousands of miles, deepened steadily as the continent's crust began to split. Lakes formed in its basins, their surfaces reflecting the pale sky. Around them grew grasslands, forests, and the first scattered groups of early humans. These lands would one day become cradles of civilization, but in this ancient time they were wilderness, open spaces filled with movement and sound. Herds of antelope thundered across the plains. Elephants, smaller but tougher than today's, grazed near waterholes alongside rhinos and hippos. The earth trembled occasionally beneath their feet as distant quakes rolled through the valley. Each tremor was a whisper from the planet's heart, a reminder that everything standing upon its surface was temporary. Even the oceans were sculpting the world in their own way. Sea levels were lower because so much water was locked in ice, exposing continental shelves that are now hidden beneath waves. The English Channel did not yet exist. Britain was part of mainland Europe. Australia was connected to New Guinea by wide stretches of land, and the islands of Southeast Asia formed vast peninsulas. Across these routes, animals and early humans moved freely, following food, warmth, and curiosity. The sea itself carved cliffs and beaches, grinding rocks into sand. Tides rose and fell under the pull of a moon slightly closer to Earth than it is today. The planet was full of motion, slow, patient, and unstoppable. Each gust of wind, each quake, each ripple in the ocean was part of the same story, the story of a living world quietly shaping itself into what we would one day call home. Life 1 million years ago moved to the slow pulse of the planet itself. Every heartbeat, every footstep, every wing beat followed the rhythm of the seasons, a rhythm measured not in months, but in centuries. Across the frozen plains of the north, herds of mammoths marched in quiet procession, their massive bodies swaying with calm purpose. Long hair rippled down their sides, catching crystals of ice that sparkled like dust in the pale sun. They traveled together, mothers and calves, guided by memory older than language, moving between feeding grounds. Had existed since the ice first came. With them wandered steppe bison, woolly rhinoceroses, and reindeer whose hooves struck soft thuds against packed snow. Predators followed at a respectful distance, packs of dire wolves, strong-shouldered and intelligent, their eyes glinting amber in the half-light. In the shadows, saber-toothed cats waited for opportunity, silent and deliberate. When they moved, it was sudden and precise, a blur of muscle through the frost. The hunt was never wasteful. Every kill fed dozens of others, and nothing was left to rot. The cycle of life and death was efficient, balanced, ancient. Farther south, where the world warmed, the landscape changed its texture. Forests of birch and spruce softened into meadows of grass and wildflowers, and those meadows opened into wide steppes that shimmered beneath long summer light. The air carried the hum of insects and the murmur of running water. Birds filled the sky, cranes, geese, vultures, and smaller songbirds whose calls drifted for miles in the thin air. Amphibians stirred in ponds that froze each winter and thawed each spring, repeating the same patient miracle year after year. Beneath the surface of the soil, insects tunneled, turning fallen leaves into nutrients that would feed new growth when the warmth returned. Life in this age knew how to wait. It understood that abundance and scarcity were parts of the same pattern. In the tropical belts of Africa and Southeast Asia, the story was entirely different. There the air was heavy with moisture and scent, thick with the smell of rain and the sweetness of fruit. Forest canopies formed green cathedrals that stretched unbroken for hundreds of miles. Sunlight filtered through layers of leaves in narrow shafts, illuminating tiny clouds of dust and pollen that glowed like gold. Monkeys leapt between branches with easy grace, and early apes moved deliberately through the trees, testing their balance, learning to use hands that would someday hold tools. Elephants wandered through clearings, trampling paths that other animals followed. Antelope flicked their ears at the buzz of flies, and crocodiles basked at the edges of rivers that carried life from mountain to sea. The nights were loud with frogs, cicadas, and unseen wings. The forest never slept. It simply changed its rhythm from day to darkness, from light to sound. Beneath the surface of the oceans, life was even more abundant. Cold currents from the poles met warm equatorial waters, stirring nutrients that fed entire worlds. Plankton bloomed in drifting clouds, turning the water milky with life. Tiny crustaceans and fish swarmed in these blooms, followed by larger hunters, tuna, sharks, and the early ancestors of modern whales. The great whales sang to one another through the deep, their low calls echoing across hundreds of miles. Coral reefs grew slowly in the shallows, fragile cities built from skeletons of living polyps. They provided shelter for countless species, anemones waving like soft hands, bright fish darting between branches of stone, sea turtles gliding through narrow channels worn smooth by centuries of tide. Even the ocean floor was busy with movement, starfish crawling, worms burrowing, shellfish filtering invisible meals from the passing water. Every inch of the sea was alive, breathing in time with the turning of the earth. In this balance, nothing existed alone. The death of one creature nourished another. The melting of ice fed rivers that in turn fed forests. The fall of a tree opened light for new growth. The planet's systems intertwined like the threads of a vast tapestry. From the quiet tundra to the vibrant tropics, every living thing belonged to the same patient design. And though no human civilization yet existed to witness it, the story of the world was already complete, an orchestra playing endlessly beneath the cold and gentle sky, its melody too slow for any single lifetime to hear, yet steady enough to echo across 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years ago, a quiet intelligence had already begun to move across the warm lands of Africa. These were our ancestors, members of the species Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, early humans who lived by the rhythm of the earth and the limits of daylight. They were strong and lean, their bodies built for distance and endurance rather than speed. Their faces were heavy-browed, their hands powerful and skilled. Each tool they shaped from stone was both simple and miraculous, flakes struck from a core of flint, sharpened edges that could cut, scrape, and carve. They carried these tools with them as they moved, keeping them as precious possessions. Fire, still rare and uncertain, was the greatest discovery of all. Some learned to preserve it from lightning strikes or the embers of wildfires, guarding it through the night with careful patience. The crackle of flames drew the first circles of community. Light and warmth created the boundary between safety and the unknown. Around those early fires, language began to stir. Not full words yet, but gestures, tones, and rhythms that carried meaning. The glow of burning wood painted faces in gold and shadow, and for the first time, the darkness of night belonged to humans. These people did not yet think of time as we do. Their lives followed the slow turning of seasons, the migration of animals, the fruiting of trees. They walked along riverbanks where crocodiles slept, through valleys where elephants grazed, and across high plateaus where the wind hummed endlessly. Their senses were tuned to the smallest details, the scent of rain, the crack of distant stone, the pattern of stars above the horizon. They knew which roots could be eaten, which caves held warmth, which stones gave the best edge. When they traveled, they carried the memory of the land within them. Trails were marked not with signs, but with memory. A twisted tree, a dark ridge, a place where water sang against rock. They spoke to one another in low murmurs, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in warning. At night, they watched sparks rise from the fire and vanish into the sky, unaware that those same sparks were tiny reflections of the stars they could not yet name. As their numbers slowly spread beyond Africa, small groups reached the edges of Eurasia, following game herds across grassy plains and along river valleys. They did not conquer new lands, they adapted to them. In colder regions, they wrapped themselves in furs and built shelters of wood and bone. They learned to use fire not only for warmth but for transformation, hardening spear points, cooking meat, softening roots that had once been inedible. Each act of discovery reshaped their bodies and minds. The warmth of fire lengthened their evenings, allowing them to sit together, to imagine, to remember. Their children learned by watching, their elders guided by instinct and experience. Slowly, the human pattern began to form: cooperation, planning, the sharing of food and protection. It was fragile but enduring, like the first flame coaxed from dry grass. The world around them responded. Animals grew cautious of the glow that flickered in the dark. Predators circled at a distance, confused by the new scent of smoke and the strange confidence of upright creatures who no longer feared the night. The forests bore witness to their presence. Charred rings of earth where fires once burned, fragments of tools left behind in the dust, footprints pressed into clay that hardened with the heat of the sun. Every sign of their existence was temporary, yet together they formed the outline of something permanent, the beginning of human memory. To those who lived then, there was no sense of progress, no awareness of the ages to come. There was only the present, the rhythm of steps through tall grass, the taste of roasted meat, the comfort of warmth against the cool breath of dawn. But in that present lay everything that would follow. The fire they guarded was more than light. It was knowledge, continuity, and the first whisper of the future. Around it, humanity began to dream, and the long story of our species quietly took its first breath beneath the stars. If you could stand anywhere on Earth 1 million years ago, close your eyes and listen, the world would reveal itself in layers of sound. The first thing you would notice is the absence of noise. No engines, no constant hum of electricity, no distant echo of machinery. The silence was alive, not empty, filled with texture and breath. The wind spoke first. It moved differently through each landscape, a whisper through tundra grass, a sigh across open water, a low moan where it slipped between stones. In the far north, the air whistled around the edges of glaciers, sculpting ridges that sang faintly when the temperature shifted. When the wind rested, you could hear the faint crack of ice expanding, the deep, muffled groan of glaciers pushing forward inch by inch. These were the slow songs of the frozen world, patient and unending. In forests farther south, the sound changed. Trees rubbed against one another in long, rhythmic creaks. Snow fell in a hush that swallowed every echo. On warmer days, meltwater trickled from branches and struck the ground in delicate patterns, each drop a tiny heartbeat of the coming spring. Move toward the grasslands, and the quiet deepens into rhythm. The ground vibrated faintly beneath the hooves of migrating animals. You could hear entire herds long before you saw them, a low thunder growing on the horizon, steady and calm rather than violent. The air carried their breath, the rustle of dry stalks, the occasional call of a calf searching for its mother. Predators followed at a distance, padding silently through the brush. Their footfalls made almost no sound at all, only the faint displacement of air. Overhead, birds traced long arcs through the sky, their wings slicing the wind with gentle swishes that faded into the distance. At night, when the temperature dropped and the herds rested, the plains filled with other voices. Wolves called across the darkness, their howls rising and falling like waves. Each response came from miles away, overlapping, forming a conversation as old as hunger itself. When their calls ceased, the land sank again into stillness so complete that even your heartbeat would feel intrusive. In the tropics, the world was louder but not chaotic. It was a different kind of music, built from countless small instruments. The constant buzz of insects formed a bass note that never ended. Frogs croaked in complex patterns, answering one another from opposite banks of flooded rivers. The canopy overhead crackled with life. Monkeys leaping, leaves tearing, wings fluttering through sudden shafts of light. Rain arrived without warning, first as a whisper, then as a roar that drowned every other sound. It beat against leaves, branches, and water, turning the forest into a single vibrating surface. When it passed, steam rose in silence, and for a moment the only sound was the dripping of water from the tips of giant ferns. The air smelled of soil and sap, and somewhere far off, thunder rolled again to remind the land that the cycle was not yet finished. Even the oceans had their own language. Stand on an ancient beach and you would hear waves that seemed slower, heavier, because the tides were pulled by a moon slightly closer to Earth. Each crash against the shore sent vibrations through the sand. The water retreated with a soft hiss as it dragged grains and shells back into its depths. Gulls and seabirds called above the surf, their cries echoing across open water. Beneath the surface, a deeper choir resonated. The low songs of whales drifted through the dark, long notes that could travel hundreds of miles. Dolphins clicked and whistled, schools of fish shifted with a faint rustle like wind moving through grass. And somewhere below, the crack of shifting ice echoed. From distant polar seas, the ocean was never silent, yet its sounds were round and soothing, like the breathing of something vast and kind. Wherever you stood, the world spoke in calm repetition. Nothing hurried. Every sound carried meaning, every pause allowed space for rest. Day faded slowly into evening, and the light softened until the horizon disappeared. The night that followed was not black but deep blue, filled with stars so bright that the landscape glowed faintly beneath them. You could hear the slow rhythm of your own breathing, blending with the world's. This was Earth 1 million years ago, not empty, not silent, but perfectly tuned, each sound a gentle reminder that life and stillness could exist together, and that time itself moved like a long, unbroken song. The turning of seasons 1 million years ago was a grand, deliberate motion, each cycle drawn out over longer spans than our modern world allows. Spring did not burst, it unfolded, hesitating between frost and thaw. When the sun climbed higher and lingered on the horizon, the snow softened into rivulets that wove through grass still pressed flat from winter. Rivers swelled, carrying fragments of ice downstream until the water ran clear again. Migrating birds returned, tracing ancient paths written in instinct and magnetic pull. Their calls marked the true beginning of warmth. On the tundra, delicate flowers opened for only a few weeks, pale blues, purples, and yellows that colored the gray landscape before vanishing back into seed. The air smelled of meltwater and wet stone. Farther south, forests awakened with a shimmer of young leaves. Insects stirred, amphibians sang in marshes, and herds that had wintered far away began their slow journey north. Each movement was measured, not rushed, as if the entire planet exhaled in contentment. Summer arrived quietly and lingered longer. The tilt of Earth's axis brought sunlight that never fully faded in high latitudes. Days stretched until midnight glowed with the faint light of an endless dusk. The ground softened, the rivers spread wider, and plants took advantage of every moment. Mammoths and reindeer grazed deep into the night, their silhouettes moving against a sky that never turned black. In temperate zones, forests grew dense and lush, canopies heavy with leaves that rustled softly under warm winds. Thunderstorms rolled across the plains, feeding the soil with rain. In the tropics, the wet season intensified, transforming entire regions into green oceans of growth. The sound of rain became a constant pulse, steady and soothing. Every living thing drank deeply from this abundance, aware in some quiet way that the gift would not last. The rhythm of the sun governed all, a gentle metronome that counted the long days until the world cooled again. Autumn came as a slow turning inward. The light thinned, the air sharpened, and colors deepened into gold and rust. Trees began their ritual of release, letting go of leaves that carpeted the forest floor. Insects retreated underground, frogs buried themselves in mud. Birds gathered in vast flocks that swirled across the sky in shapes that mirrored wind and thought. On the plains, animals fed frantically to store fat for the long freeze ahead. Early humans followed this abundance, moving with the herds, harvesting roots and fruits before frost claimed them. Firelight once again became the center of existence, the boundary between warmth and darkness. Nights grew longer, and each breath of wind carried the scent of snow waiting beyond the horizon. The world held its breath. Then winter returned, slow but certain, descending like a long sigh across the continents. Snow covered the land in silence. The rivers stiffened, their surfaces glinting beneath pale sunlight. Ice advanced down from the mountains, reclaiming valleys it had left behind centuries before. Yet beneath the frost, life persisted. Seeds waited beneath the snow. Fish swam in dark rivers under layers of ice. Bears slept in deep dens, their hearts beating only a few times each minute. The planet seemed still, but every sleeping thing carried the memory of warmth. Even in the coldest heart of winter, the core of the earth burned, and the slow dance of seasons continued unseen. Time itself flowed differently in that age. Decades blurred into centuries, centuries folded into millennia. Change came not in sudden events, but in subtle shifts. A glacier creeping forward, a forest line inching south, a species adapting by a single trait. The world was patient, unhurried, aware of no deadlines, no history to record. Seasons repeated like verses in a song older than memory, and within their repetition, the planet found stability. To live then was to move with time rather than against it, to understand that every moment belonged to a larger rhythm. The Earth 1 million years ago did not measure days. It measured cycles, and in each cycle the story of life continued, quiet, complete, and endless. Beneath the frozen valleys and green forests of 1 million years ago, the earth never rested. Far below the quiet surface, heat moved like a slow current, flowing upward from the planet's molten heart. The crust, which appeared so solid from above, was a thin, brittle skin stretched across an ocean of rock that churned and folded with ancient patience. In some places, this hidden motion found release. Along the edges of continents and deep beneath the oceans, molten rock rose through cracks, pushing and twisting until the ground trembled. Earthquakes rippled across distant mountains with the deep, rolling sound of thunder trapped inside stone. Sometimes, the pressure grew too great, and a volcano opened its mouth to the sky. Ash and fire burst upward, columns of smoke spreading through the cold air. To any creature watching, the sight must have seemed like the planet speaking, an enormous breath of flame against a world of ice. Yet even in that destruction there was purpose. The ash carried minerals that would feed new soil. The lava hardened into land that would one day grow forests and grass. Creation and ruin were the same motion, two sides of the same long heartbeat. The ring of fire that circles the Pacific was already alive then. Islands that would become Japan, Indonesia, and New Zealand trembled often, their mountains glowing faintly red at their peaks. In East Africa, rifts widened slowly, releasing columns of steam where underground water met magma. The Great Rift Valley deepened, carving the landscape into terraces and escarpments that caught rainfall and formed new lakes. Around those lakes, early humans gathered, unaware that the warm ground beneath them was shaped by forces miles below. They felt the earth move from time to time and accepted it as part of the world's language. To the north, in the Mediterranean region, volcanoes dotted the horizon. Some slept for centuries before waking in a single night of fire. The pattern repeated endlessly: calm, pressure, eruption, renewal. In the far reaches of the Arctic, even under glaciers miles thick, the crust flexed and cracked, producing deep rumbles that traveled through ice like distant drums. Under the oceans, the story was quieter but just as relentless. Along the mid-Atlantic ridge, new seafloor was being born each day. Magma arose through a long seam stretching from pole to pole, cooling as it met the frigid water. The Atlantic Ocean widened grain by grain, a few centimeters every year, unnoticed but unstoppable. Hydrothermal vents dotted the abyss, spewing mineral-rich water heated by magma. Around them, strange ecosystems flourished: tube worms, clams, and microbes that fed not on sunlight, but on chemical energy from the Earth's interior. These oases of life were reminders that the boundary between the living and the inert was thinner than it seemed. Even in darkness, heat and chemistry could create worlds. The ocean floor recorded each pulse of volcanic activity in bands of new rock, a geological diary that scientists millions of years later would learn to read. Every quake, every eruption, every slow movement of stone added its verse to the planet's endless composition. Mountains rose where there had been plains. Islands appeared, then vanished beneath waves. The continents drifted as if sleepwalking, guided by the steady convection of molten rock below. To the creatures above, these changes were imperceptible, but they shaped the destiny of every species. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide that balanced the planet's air. Earthquakes shifted rivers and created new habitats. Geothermal warmth under glaciers carved tunnels and caverns where life could hide from the cold. The surface world owed its existence to the invisible forces beneath it. The Earth was not a stage built for life. It was a living thing itself, constantly rearranging its own skin. 1 million years ago, the ground was younger, the fire brighter, and the deep pulse of the planet beat strong, a slow, steady drum that kept time for everything that walked, swam, or flew above. When darkness fell 1 million years ago, the sky revealed its vast and patient face. Without the haze of modern air, every star shone sharp and steady, each point of light a small promise suspended in black infinity. The Milky Way stretched from horizon to horizon like a river of frozen fire, its countless stars blending into a pale ribbon that pulsed faintly with the movement of the earth. The moon hung closer then, only a little nearer, but enough to make its pull on the tide stronger and its glow brighter. On clear nights, it washed the landscape in silver, outlining the ridges of ice and the slow glint of rivers winding through dark valleys. Shadows were soft, stretched long across the plains, and the world glimmered faintly as if dusted with frost. In high latitudes, the auroras moved almost every night, veils of green and violet light that drifted and folded like breath across the polar sky. They hissed faintly, a whisper that could be heard when the air was perfectly still. For animals and early humans alike, these lights must have been both familiar and mysterious, an endless performance written in the magnetism of the planet. The constellations were the same patterns we know, yet none of them had names. The stars did not belong to myth, but to silence. Early humans, sitting beside their fires, looked upward through smoke and saw those same shapes, unaware that they were tracing the first steps toward story and meaning. The brightness of Venus, the slow drift of Mars, the pale shimmer of the Pleiades, all these markers guided migration, hinted at time, and repeated in cycles that could be felt long before they were understood. The slow spin of the heavens gave rhythm to existence. Days were measured by the sun's angle, months by the growing and shrinking of the moon, years by the return of warmth and the call of birds. Time was not counted, it was sensed, lived, inhaled. Every creature moved through it without anxiety, following instincts tuned to light and shadow. The night sky was a map, a clock, and a mirror all at once. When clouds gathered, the darkness deepened into a velvet so complete that even outlines vanished. The sounds of life changed, voices softened, steps slowed, breath turned cautious. In forests, nocturnal animals stirred, the soft rustle of small bodies through leaves, the hoot of an owl gliding low above the ground. On the plains, predators lifted their heads toward the scent of prey carried on cool air. Firelight became a boundary again, a fragile bubble of warmth within the vast unknown. Early humans learned to read the night by its sounds. The crack of a branch, the distant growl of a lion, the chorus of insects and frogs, all told them what the darkness held. Around their fires, they waited and listened, the stars reflecting faintly in their eyes. Some nights, when the sky cleared and the moon rose bright, they stepped away from the flames and let the silver light touch their faces. The moonlight flattened color, softened every shape, made the world seem eternal. Over long centuries, the sky itself changed in subtle ways. The Earth's axis wobbled slightly, altering the position of the stars in the night's rotation. The moon drifted farther away by a few centimeters each year, its influence gently weakening. Meteor showers came and went in predictable arcs, dust from comets that had circled the sun since the planet's birth. Occasionally, bright streaks cut through the dark and vanished, leaving only the faint scent of burnt air. To those who witnessed them, these moments must have felt like the gods of the unseen world speaking directly through light. The same events repeat today, though we watch them through the glow of our own cities and rarely feel the silence that once framed them. 1,000,000 years ago, every night was a cathedral of stars, every dawn a quiet revelation. The heavens moved slowly but faithfully, marking the passing of time in a world where no calendar was needed, where memory itself was measured by the return of the moon. Water 1,000,000 years ago was the architect of nearly everything that could move. It wore down mountains, filled valleys, and drew silver lines across every continent. Even in the heart of the coldest plains, meltwater found ways to run. Each spring began with the quiet breaking of ice, first a few cracks, then the slow creak of whole rivers loosening from winter's grip. Streams poured from the bases of glaciers, milky with rock dust ground fine by centuries of pressure. These streams joined into broad rivers that twisted through newly carved valleys, spreading out across the land like veins across a living hand. When the sunlight struck them, They gleamed pale blue, reflecting the sky so clearly that mountains seemed to float upon their surfaces. The sound of running water was everywhere. In some regions it whispered, in others it roared, tumbling over boulders as it sought the sea. The rhythm of flow was constant and patient, a reminder that nothing on earth ever truly stood still. Where the glaciers retreated, they left behind chains of lakes, cold and deep, their waters so clear that stones on the bottom could be seen even from the surface. Some of these lakes stretched for hundreds of miles, their edges lined with young forests that drank from their shores. Fog rose each morning, drifting low over the surface before the sun burned it away. The lakes gathered rain from the sky and fed rivers that cut new paths across the continents. Over time, these rivers would become the foundations of fertile plains, floodplains where life could root and multiply. To early humans and animals alike, these waterways were the threads of survival, sources of food, of drink, of direction. They followed the glitter of water through the land the way we follow roads now. Where water pooled, life gathered. Where it dried, only dust remained. Rain itself had a different voice then. In temperate zones it arrived softly, often for days at a time, filling the air with a low hiss that smoothed every sharp sound. In the tropics it came suddenly, in sheets that struck the ground so hard the surface seemed to boil. The smell of rain was the same as it is now. Earth, growth, renewal, but stronger, more complete. The first drops carried the scent of distant oceans. The last left a clean silence in their wake. Storms formed slowly over warm seas, building towers of cloud that could stretch 5 miles high. Lightning flashed within them, lighting the undersides of clouds in brief bursts of white. The thunder that followed rolled across the horizon, fading into the steady rhythm of the waves. When the rain reached land, it filled every hollow, ran through every crevice, and carved the edges of every stone it touched. Even in drought, moisture lingered somewhere, hidden in the deep ground, waiting to rise again. The ocean itself was the final keeper of all this motion. Rivers surrendered their strength to it, glaciers fed it, the wind sculpted it. Tides rose higher then, pulled by the moon's closer hand, advancing and retreating with slow grace. Shorelines were wider, the beaches rougher, each grain of sand a fragment of older worlds ground down by water's insistence. Waves struck cliffs and retreated endlessly, carrying away dust to build new shores somewhere else. Beneath the surface, currents looped across the globe, distributing warmth from equator to pole. These currents, guided by salinity and temperature, shaped climate everywhere. They governed where storms were born, where rain would fall, and where deserts would grow. When ice melted or snow returned, the pattern shifted slightly, a delicate balance recalibrated again and again over millennia. Water was not just a substance, it was time itself made visible. Every drop that flowed 1,000,000 years ago still exists somewhere on Earth, locked in ice, drifting in clouds, hidden in stone, or pulsing through our veins. It moves, changes, and returns, the oldest traveler our planet has ever known, whispering the same story without pause. Everywhere that water reached, life followed. The Earth 1,000,000 years ago was tied together by invisible threads that ran from the smallest grain of pollen to the largest creature that walked the plains. In the shallows of rivers, algae bloomed in slow spirals of green, feeding tiny crustaceans that in turn fed fish. On the banks, reeds bent with the weight of insects, and frogs crouched among them waiting for the faint vibration that meant a meal. Birds glided overhead, dropping seeds that would sprout when the rains came. Each link in the chain was both cause and effect, woven into an order so intricate that nothing existed apart from it. In the tropics, vines looped between trees like arteries, carrying ants and beetles through a green world that never slept. Fruit bats spread seeds across miles of forest each night, replanting what storms and elephants destroyed by day. Every creature shaped its surroundings without knowing it. The weight of a mammoth's foot pressed seeds deeper into soil. The burrow of a mole turned dry ground into a trap for rain. The shedding of leaves cooled the air beneath the trees. Balance was not an idea. It was simply the way the world behaved when left to itself. On the open plains, grazers and hunters kept one another alive in a quiet conversation of survival. Herds of antelope, zebra, and ancient bison moved with the seasons, cropping grass that grew from soil enriched by their own waste. Their passage stirred insects that fed birds, and their hooves churned the surface so that new shoots could find light. Lions, wolves, and other predators culled the weak, ensuring the strength of the herds they hunted. Nothing was wasted. A carcass left on the ground became a feast for vultures and beetles, then for bacteria that returned its minerals to the earth. When rain fell again, those minerals nourished the next generation of grass, and the cycle began anew. The beauty of the system lay in its repetition. Death and decay were not endings. They were transformations, each stage flowing seamlessly into the next. From the tundra to the rainforest, the pattern repeated, adjusted to climate and terrain, but always driven by the same steady rule. What lives must give back what it has taken. In the forests, life climbed upward. Layers of canopy formed like floors of a great building. Roots below, shrubs at the base, branches above, and a ceiling of leaves where sunlight filtered through in fractured beams. Birds nested at different heights according to their size and song. Small mammals glided between trunks. Every fallen tree became a world of its own, moss-covered and damp, alive with insects and fungi. The decomposition of one giant fed thousands of smaller beings. When storms broke, the toppled trunks opened gaps for new growth, and seedlings reached toward the light. The forest remade itself endlessly, one life feeding another in a circle so complete that it seemed eternal. Even fire played its part. Lightning sometimes set dry leaves alight, clearing space for young plants, releasing nutrients locked in old wood. After the flames cooled, green shoots appeared through the ash within days, delicate and defiant. Destruction, in this sense, was simply another form of renewal. In the seas, the same web shimmered through light and current. Phytoplankton turned sunlight into food, drifting just beneath the surface like dust motes in a beam of light. Tiny fish fed upon them. Larger fish fed upon the small. Sharks, turtles, and whales governed the balance from above. Coral reefs anchored this abundance, their branching structures home to species that never touched the shore. When coral died, its skeleton remained, a foundation for future colonies. Even the deep ocean, black and cold, teemed with creatures built for pressure and darkness, their faint lights flickering like distant stars. Everything depended on everything else, a chain of energy that moved from sun to plant to predator to decay. The planet was a single organism, its ecosystems connected by wind, tide, and migration. To live, then, was to belong completely, to be both cause and consequence, participant and product of the Earth's quiet perfection. The climate of 1 million years ago moved in tides almost as predictable as the oceans. Warmth and cold traded places across centuries, each taking its turn with patient inevitability. Scientists today call these movements glacial and interglacial cycles, great pulses of temperature driven by the planet's orbit and the tilt of its axis. To the world itself, they were simply breath, long inhalations of ice, long exhalations of thaw. During the colder phases, ice sheets crept outward from the poles, spreading mile by mile until they swallowed whole continents. Snow that fell in winter did not melt in summer. It thickened, compressed, and hardened into ice that glowed blue in the buried light. Temperatures fell, sea levels dropped, and winds carried dry dust across the land. Forests retreated southward, deserts expanded where grass once grew. The air itself became thinner and sharper, its moisture locked inside the glaciers. Yet even then the cycle contained promise. The cold stored water and nutrients that would be released again when the warmth returned. The planet was teaching itself rhythm, how to hold, how to let go. When the Earth tilted slightly closer to the sun, or its orbit stretched just enough, the balance shifted. The sun's warmth touched the frozen plains with a little more insistence, and the great melt began. At first it was quiet, trickles running beneath the ice, the low groan of movement deep within glaciers that had slept for centuries. Rivers swelled, carrying silt that would one day feed fertile plains. Valleys flooded, carving new paths through mountains. The oceans rose slowly but steadily, claiming land that had been dry for generations. Where tundra had stretched for hundreds of miles, grass returned, followed by forests that climbed again toward the poles. Animals followed the green edge northward, herds moving along corridors of warmth. Birds found new nesting grounds. Insects swarmed in the sudden abundance of flowers. The air softened, filling again with moisture and scent. For thousands of years the planet basked in this reprieve, breathing easily between waves of ice. The length of each cycle was measured not in human lifetimes, but in the slow ticking of astronomical gears. Roughly every 100,000 years the pattern repeated, sometimes colder, sometimes warmer, always faithful to its own rhythm. These changes reshaped the geography of the world. During warm periods, coastlines crept inland, turning valleys into bays and isolating islands that would evolve their own species. When the cold returned, the seas withdrew, exposing vast land bridges that connected continents. Life flowed back and forth across these changing boundaries, mixing and adapting in endless combinations. Evolution quickened in response to the shifting climate, refining the bodies and instincts of every creature that walked, swam, or flew. A mammoth's dense coat, a polar bear's thick fat, a bird's migratory map, all were answers written by the dialogue between ice and sun. The atmosphere itself joined in the rhythm. During the freezes, levels of carbon dioxide fell as the oceans absorbed more gas. During thaws, they rose again as warm water released what it had stored. These delicate exchanges kept the planet's temperature within a range that allowed life to continue. A difference of only a few degrees meant the boundary between a frozen sea and a living ocean. The system was perfectly tuned, resilient yet fragile. To stand within it was to witness the patience of nature on a scale beyond comprehension. The planet did not fear its own extremes. It simply shifted from one to the other with the confidence of memory. Each glacial pulse wrote another line into the Earth's geology, layering sediments, building mountain terraces, leaving behind traces that would tell its story to future eyes. The climate 1 million years ago was not cruel or kind. It was balanced, disciplined, a slow heartbeat of creation and rest that carried every living thing forward through time. Across the shifting climate of 1 million years ago, evolution worked with calm precision. Change was not sudden. It was incremental, a conversation between life and environment carried out over countless generations. When the air grew colder, fur thickened and bodies grew larger to hold heat. When warmth returned, coats thinned, colors lightened, and new patterns of behavior emerged. Mammoths that once roamed temperate valleys adapted to frozen plains, their teeth broadening to grind coarse tundra grass. Lions of the south developed heavier bones and longer hair until they became cave lions that could stalk prey across snow. In the forests, bears learned to sleep through winter, conserving energy until the thaw. These shifts were not decisions, but quiet reactions, coded into blood and bone. Each success was carried forward. Each failure faded without notice. Evolution was memory made physical, a record of what worked inscribed in the shapes of living things. In the oceans, the same patience sculpted new forms. Whales grew larger as food became seasonal, their migrations stretching for thousands of miles between feeding and breeding grounds. Seals and walruses thickened with layers of fat that insulated them against freezing water. Fish schools learned to move in unison, their coordinated turns confusing predators. Coral adapted to the changing chemistry of the sea, shifting its colonies deeper or shallower as light and temperature allowed. Even plankton altered its timing, blooming earlier or later depending on the seasons of ice. Beneath the waves, life experimented endlessly, guided by nothing but the quiet mathematics of survival. Every adaptation was a reply to a question the planet asked in its own language of temperature, current, and light. By the end of the million-year span, the world held forms that would be familiar to us and others that would vanish before history began. Species rose, flourished, and disappeared, their brief presence leaving fossils for future eyes to read. Evolution's hand was gentle but relentless, touching every feather, fin, and leaf. The animals that survived were those most in tune with the planet's rhythm, those that could listen to its seasons and adapt without hesitation. Each generation carried forward the story written by the last, shaping a living lineage that reached from the first spark of life to the creatures that walked beneath the stars. The march of evolution was not a race, but a pilgrimage, every step guided by the slow, steady music of the earth itself. Predator and prey have always been the twin engines of the living world, and 1 million years ago their balance shaped every landscape. The cold plains of Eurasia and North America were theaters of quiet pursuit, where strength, patience, and instinct met in an endless exchange. Packs of dire wolves trotted low to the ground, reading the wind for scent. Their coats were thick, gray, and mottled, their bodies lean with endurance. They hunted together, communicating through small gestures, ears flicking, tails shifting, the faintest growl meaning everything. They followed herds of reindeer, bison, and young mammoths, watching for weakness. When the moment came, they surged forward in silence, their breath turning to mist that sparkled briefly before vanishing. The chase was swift, merciless, but rarely wasteful. What the wolves did not take, ravens and foxes would find. Nothing lingered unused in that world. To the north, saber-toothed cats waited among low shrubs, muscles coiled under fur the color of dust. Their teeth, long as daggers, were both gift and burden, demanding precision in the strike. They lived solitary lives, moving through territories marked by scent rather than voice. When they brought down prey, they ate in deep, rhythmic pulls, listening always for the approach of scavengers bold enough to challenge them. The great bears of that age ruled the edges of the forests. Some were ancestors of the brown and polar bears we know. Others, like the enormous short-faced bear, were creatures of another scale entirely. They could stand taller than two humans, able to see over the waving grass to spot movement miles away. Despite their size, they moved with quiet grace, preferring berries and carrion to unnecessary conflict. In the warmer south, lions hunted in prides across the open plains of Africa, their roars carrying over miles of dry wind. The echo of those voices was the anthem of the savannah, a declaration that order still held. Hyenas followed them, laughing cries marking the places where night feasts took place. In Asia, tigers padded through shadowed jungles, their stripes breaking their outlines among shafts of sunlight. Each region had its apex hunter, each tuned to its climate and prey, each performing the same ancient role, to keep life moving, to trim excess, to strengthen what remained. The prey were no less remarkable. Mammoths grazed across tundra that rolled like a frozen sea, their trunks sweeping arcs in the snow as they searched for dry grass. They moved in family groups led by old matriarchs whose memories held maps of water and shelter. When danger threatened, they formed circles around their calves, tusks outward, trumpeting into the wind. Their bodies carried warmth for days even in the heart of winter. Beneath their woolly coats, fat and muscle stored the heat of seasons long past. Bison and horses shared the plains with them, heads lowered as they shoveled snow aside to uncover forage. In the forests, deer and elk browsed on twigs and bark, careful and alert. Gazelles and antelope of the south lived by sight and speed, relying on coordination more than defense. The smallest changes in wind or shadow were enough to send entire herds galloping in unison, a moving wall of dust and breath. The balance between hunter and hunted extended into the air and water. Raptors circled above, their sharp eyes scanning the ground for the twitch of fur. Owls glided silently through the night, striking with precision born of necessity. In rivers, crocodiles and giant turtles waded beneath still surfaces, their patience measured in hours. Each encounter was an equation of energy, the cost of the chase against the reward of the catch. Success kept species alive, failure fed another. There was no malice in the hunt, no cruelty, only the constant arithmetic of survival. Predation shaped the herds, favoring the swift, the alert, the adaptable. It refined senses, strengthened limbs, sharpened minds. Prey in turn shaped their hunters, pushing them to evolve speed, cunning, and endurance. Together they created equilibrium, a dance so ancient that even now its rhythm echoes in the instincts of every creature alive. 1 million years ago, the world thrived on that balance. It was not peaceful in the way of stillness, but it was orderly, honest, and whole, the pure expression of life sustaining itself through motion. Beneath the shadow of mammoths and the stride of lions, a quieter world carried most of the planet's true labor. 1 million years ago, the soil itself was alive. Billions of small creatures moved through it in constant, invisible motion. Earthworms tunneled through frozen ground each summer, loosening and enriching it with every inch they passed. Beetles turned the remains of plants into food for roots. Termites built vast mounds that breathed like lungs, drawing air through the dirt and releasing moisture into the atmosphere. Ants harvested seeds, carried them underground, and by accident planted new growth for the following season. These tiny workers held the balance of entire ecosystems, cycling nutrients so that forests could rise and grasslands could renew. If one could shrink small enough to walk there. Tunnels, the world would appear as a labyrinth of glittering grains and faint vibrations, a humming underworld mirroring the surface above. Above the ground, insects painted the air with movement. Butterflies already traced color through tropical light, their wings patterned in designs that frightened predators and lured mates. Dragonflies, descendants of ancient giants, skimmed over ponds hunting smaller insects with the same precision they had perfected hundreds of millions of years before. Bees hovered around early flowering plants, carrying pollen from blossom to blossom, unknowing custodians of diversity. The hum of their wings filled the warm months with music so constant that it blended into the sound of wind. When night came, moths replaced them, following the moon's glow across open fields. In temperate regions, swarms of mosquitoes rose at dusk from wet ground, feeding bats that flitted silently above. Each small creature served a purpose. Each fitted perfectly into a web so dense and intricate that even the disappearance of one species could alter the rest. Yet extinction and adaptation were part of the same design. Where one form vanished, another took its place, shaped by the same patient hand of time. Reptiles, the silent heirs of older ages, occupied the margins between land and water. Crocodiles lay half-submerged in rivers, their bodies unchanged from ancestors that had watched the dinosaurs fade away. Lizards warmed themselves on rocks, their scales gleaming like wet metal. In warmer climates, snakes moved through grass almost invisibly, tasting the air for the scent of prey. Some lived among roots and stones. Others swam through shallows after fish and frogs. They were reminders that the world's history did not vanish but folded into new forms. Amphibians bridged the same boundaries. Frogs and salamanders thrived wherever water lingered, their calls rising from ponds and marshes each evening. Their fragile skins breathed moisture and warning, signaling the health of the ecosystems that surrounded them. Where they vanished, silence followed, a pause in the planet's music. Among the small mammals, the variety was astonishing. Rodents spread through every landscape, from tundra to jungle. Their teeth evolved to gnaw through root and seed alike. Rabbits and hares multiplied quickly, feeding every predator from eagle to wolf. Shrews darted through leaf litter, their hearts beating hundreds of times each minute as they hunted insects beneath fallen leaves. Bats hung in caves by day and poured out in clouds at dusk, consuming millions of insects in a single night. Each creature lived fast, reproduced often, and anchored the food chain from below. Their remains fed scavengers, their burrows aerated the ground, their constant activity mixed the layers of soil. Though unnoticed beside the giants of their age, they were the machinery of survival. Without them, the forests would choke on their own growth, rivers would clog with fallen debris, and predators would starve. The small and the unseen carried the planet forward through sheer persistence. 1 million years ago, the Earth's greatness was built not by the strength of its largest animals, but by the quiet industry of its smallest citizens, each heartbeat a note in the long, steady rhythm of life. 1 million years ago, forests stretched across the continents like living continents of their own, a tapestry of green that shimmered under the slow march of the seasons. They began near the equator as dense jungles where light filtered through 10 stories of leaves, then thinned into temperate woods of oak, beech, and pine that climbed mountainsides and followed the valleys northward until the trees gave way to tundra. Each forest was a city, every tree both citizen and building, every fallen branch a foundation for something new. The air within them was rich, thick with moisture and the slow breath of decay. Beneath the canopy, a dim green twilight ruled. Shafts of sunlight pierced through in narrow columns, turning dust and pollen into floating gold. The smell was unmistakable: sap, soil, and the faint sweetness of mushrooms that grew wherever shade and rot met. Every sound, dripping water, bird call, the creak of trunks in wind, echoed as if the forest itself were listening. It was not merely a collection of plants, but a living network, exchanging signals through roots and chemicals, adjusting to drought and rain as if guided by a common thought. In the equatorial belts, rainforests wrapped the land in constant humidity. Giant trees rose straight and smooth, their crowns tangled together so tightly that only scattered light reached the ground. Vines looped from branch to branch like the cords of an immense machine, carrying ants, orchids, and drops of water that shimmered like beads. Epiphytes perched in the crooks of branches, feeding on air and rainfall. Beneath them, the soil was thin because life consumed its own remains so quickly that little accumulated. The forest recycled everything, death returning to growth in days rather than years. When a tree fell, sunlight poured through the gap, and hundreds of seedlings fought for the open space. Growth was relentless, noise constant. Parrots, insects, frogs, and monkeys contributed to a chorus that never ceased, day melting into night without silence. The rhythm was endless abundance. Even the shadows seemed alive. Farther from the equator, the forests changed personality. Temperate woods breathed more slowly, following the seasons with deliberate precision. In spring, buds swelled on bare branches, and carpets of wildflowers filled the undergrowth before the canopy thickened. By summer, the air was cool and dappled, streams ran clear through moss-covered stones, and animals moved under the leaves like ghosts. In autumn, colors spread like fire, red, gold, and copper sweeping across the hills. Leaves fell in drifts that softened every sound, turning the forest floor into a quilt of decay. Fungi and bacteria immediately began their patient work, breaking down what had fallen. Winter stripped everything bare. The trunks stood like dark pillars against snow, the silence broken only by the crack of ice or the wing beat of a crow. Yet even in dormancy the forest lived. Roots continued to exchange water and minerals beneath frozen ground, and when the thaw came the network woke without hesitation. The trees of that era were both record and engine of the planet's health. Each ring in there would store a season's memory: rainfall, warmth, drought, and frost. Over centuries they wrote long biographies of the climate. Their leaves fed the air, drawing in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen with a steadiness that balanced everything alive. Fungi threaded through the soil around them, forming symbiotic partnerships that fed both tree and fungus. The decay of one tree nourished the birth of many. Even fire, lightning's brief gift, played a role. It burned away deadwood, released nutrients, and cleared space for light to reach the forest floor. Within weeks, shoots and seedlings covered the ash, green against black. The forest knew renewal because it had practiced it for millions of years. To walk through 1 million years ago was to move through time made visible, layers of growth, memory, and transformation standing side by side. Every breath of wind carried the scent of both death and life, indistinguishable, inseparable, part of the same endless cycle. 1 million years ago, the mountains of the world were younger and sharper, their ridges cut deep by ice and their peaks dusted with fresh snow that rarely melted. They stood as the bones of the earth exposed to the sky, slow-moving monuments that shaped wind and weather. The air thinned quickly with height, turning cool and pure. From their summits, clouds could be seen rolling below like slow tides, casting shadows that drifted across entire valleys. The Himalayas were still climbing, driven upward by the collision of continents that had begun tens of millions of years earlier. The Andes stretched unbroken along the spine of South America, volcanoes glowing faintly on their crests. In North America, the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada caught storms rolling in from the Pacific, wringing them dry before they could reach the plains. Europe's Alps, jagged and luminous under the sun, fed rivers that cut the continent's heart into a network of valleys and lakes. Each chain of peaks was a fortress of stone, but none were silent. They groaned, shifted, and occasionally broke apart with the deep, resonant thunder of avalanches and earthquakes, reminders that even mountains live and move. Life at these altitudes survived on narrow margins. Near the snow line, lichens painted the rocks in pale greens and oranges, each patch a tiny colony that ate dust and sunlight. Mosses clung to cracks where meltwater gathered, and alpine flowers unfurled briefly in the short summers, their petals bright against the gray stone. Insects adapted to cold, their bodies small and dark to absorb the sun's heat. Birds nested on cliffs where few predators could follow, soaring on thin air that carried them effortlessly between peaks. Eagles and vultures ruled these heights, their wingspans vast enough to ride the mountain winds for hours without a single beat. Below them, nimble goats and antelope moved across ledges that seemed too narrow to hold their weight, their hooves gripping the rock with delicate certainty. In the Himalayas, snow leopards prowled in silence, their fur thick, their eyes pale as the glaciers that surrounded them. The thin air slowed everything, forcing plants and animals alike to live in small gestures, brief blooms, short hunts, long rests. Survival here meant patience and precision. Water shaped these heights more than any other force. Glaciers carved valleys into the shape of giant bowls, leaving behind smooth stone and deep lakes as they retreated. Meltwater tumbled down in ribbons, forming waterfalls that glimmered in sunlight before dissolving into mist. Rivers born in snow carried minerals to the lowlands, feeding soil hundreds of miles away. Every drop that fell from a mountain eventually reached the ocean, carrying with it the story of stone turned into silt. When storms came, thunder echoed between peaks for minutes at a time, rolling like distant drums. Lightning split the clouds, striking ridgelines and sparking small fires that died quickly in the thin air. Afterward, the scent of ozone and wet rock lingered, a clean reminder of the planet's power. Nights in the mountains were colder and clearer than anywhere else. Stars seemed close enough to touch. The moon cast shadows so sharp they looked carved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of snow settling under its own weight. Even at these heights, the connection to the rest of the world remained strong. Winds carried dust from deserts and pollen from valleys, scattering them across the slopes. Seeds sometimes found purchase in a crack of soil, proof that life would try anywhere. Animals climbed up from forests below to graze on fresh growth during brief summers, then descended again when the first snow returned. Nothing stayed still. The mountains exhaled cold air into the valleys each night and drew warmth upward by day. They breathed with the planet, inhaling and exhaling clouds. To early humans who gazed upon them from far away, they must have seemed eternal, sacred, unreachable. Yet they too were changing, rising a few millimeters each year, eroding just as slowly. The high places of 1 million years ago were the same we see today, but fresher, rawer, edged with the energy of a world still in motion. They were the spine of the earth, the meeting place of stone, sky, and silence, a reminder that even the tallest peaks are part of a living body that moves, dreams, and endures. 1 million years ago, the deserts of the world stretched vast and patient beneath the slow sun, places where silence ruled and time seemed to stand still. They were not barren in the way we imagine them now, but alive with hidden rhythm. The Great Sahara, though already immense, shifted endlessly between dunes and grassland. Some epochs saw it green, laced with rivers and dotted with shallow lakes. Others saw it bone dry, a sea of rippling sand where only wind moved. Asia's Gobi spread its stones beneath a sky of sharp blue, while Australia's interior shimmered under heat that blurred the horizon into waves of mirage. The American Southwest was younger, its canyons still deepening, its mesas carving themselves from the slow retreat of water. These were landscapes shaped not by abundance but by endurance, worlds where every drop of rain, every seed, and every shadow carried weight. The ground glowed red and gold under sunlight, cracked in delicate webs that told stories of heat and thirst. When the wind rose, it moved whole dunes in silent processions, reshaping valleys overnight. Each grain of sand was a piece of ancient mountain, a fragment of the planet's memory polished smooth by centuries of motion. In the stillness of midday, the air itself shimmered. Heat lifted from the ground in wavering sheets, distorting distance and shape. The only sound was the hiss of wind sliding over stone. Yet even here life persisted, small and deliberate. Insects hid beneath rocks, emerging only at dusk when the air cooled. Lizards pressed themselves flat against the shade of thorn bushes, their skin patterned to match the ground. Snakes moved like flowing water, their bodies leaving intricate tracks that vanished with the next gust of wind. Birds nested in cliffs, flying for miles in search of water. When rare rains came, they transformed the landscape. Seeds buried for years awoke overnight, covering the ground in carpets of color that lasted only a few days. Flowers opened, with the sunrise and withered by dusk, completing entire lifetimes in a single week. Streams that had been dry for decades filled again, carving shallow paths that glittered under the returning sun. The desert lived in cycles of sleep and revelation, holding its beauty close until the moment it chose to reveal it. At night, the transformation was even greater. The heat vanished quickly, replaced by cool air that flowed down from distant mountains. The stars burned brighter here than anywhere else on Earth, their reflections trembling faintly on the polished curves of sand. The moonlight turned the dunes into frozen waves, silver and blue, their edges sharp as blades. Creatures that had hidden all day emerged in silence. Foxes trotted across the open ground, their ears twitching at the faintest rustle. Owls glided low, their wings stirring no sound. Small rodents scurried between burrows, gathering seeds while the world was cool. The desert was not empty. It simply spoke in a whisper that only the patient could hear. Even the plants participated in this secret rhythm. Cacti stored moisture deep within their flesh, using it sparingly through months of drought. Shrubs grew roots that reached incredible depths, following traces of water unseen by surface eyes. Every living thing knew its limit, and within those limits it thrived. The power of the desert lay in its purity. Nothing here could afford waste or excess. Wind sculpted stone into arches and pillars, monuments to the patience of erosion. Sandstorms rose like walls of smoke, erasing the horizon and polishing rock into glass. When the storm passed, the air cleared with a clarity so complete that the world seemed reborn. Fossils emerged from the shifting dunes, bones of creatures that had walked when the land was green, memories briefly uncovered before being hidden again. To early humans wandering its edges, the desert must have seemed both sacred and cruel, a place of trial and revelation. Crossing it demanded endurance, faith, and knowledge of stars and wind. Yet it also offered peace unmatched anywhere else on Earth. In the absence of noise and water, the heartbeat of the planet could be felt most clearly, slow and steady beneath the soles of their feet. The deserts of 1 million years ago were the Earth at its most exposed, a mirror of stone and sand that showed the simplicity at the heart of existence, where life survived not through plenty, but through perfect, patient balance. 1 million years ago, the edges of the continents were places of constant transformation, where the land met the restless sea in a dialogue of endless motion. The coastlines curved differently than they do today, drawn farther outward when the ice locked water away and pulled inward again during the long thaws. Where we now see cities and harbors, there were tidal flats, cliffs, and shallow lagoons, alive with the rhythm of waves. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, a tang that carried for miles inland. The light shimmered differently here, reflected and refracted by water so pure that the horizon often blurred into the sky. Each morning began with the same sound, the sigh of waves stretching themselves across sand, the hiss of foam retreating, the deep bass of distant breakers pounding against stone. The beach was never still. Wind drew patterns in the sand, erased them, and drew them again. The tide advanced and withdrew twice each day, carving new ridges and leaving behind shells, driftwood, and the occasional fossil washed loose from the cliffs. Everything that touched the shore left its mark for a moment before it was claimed again by the sea. The creatures of this meeting place lived in the rhythm of tides. Crabs scuttled sideways across wet sand, disappearing into burrows as waves rolled in. Shellfish clung to rocks, their shells glinting in sunlight when the water retreated. Sea stars crept over the stones with slow precision, arms curling around fragments of coral and kelp. Fish followed the tide into shallow pools to feed, flashing silver in the sunlight before the next wave drew them back. Birds crowded the sky, gulls, herons, and ancient relatives of albatross, circling above the surf. Their cries echoed against the cliffs, sharp and clear in the salt wind. On some coasts, seals hauled themselves ashore to rest, their bodies glistening in the afternoon light. In warmer regions, turtles came with the moon to dig nests in the sand, leaving trails that the tides soon erased. Every movement was both temporary and eternal, repeating through generations without alteration. The boundary between sea and land was not a line but a breathing space, expanding and contracting with the pull of the moon. Beneath the surface, life swarmed in abundance. Kelp forests waved like submerged meadows, their long fronds sheltering fish, sea urchins, and otters. Coral reefs near the equator built their intricate towers of color, home to creatures that flickered through light like shards of glass. In colder waters, plankton drifted in vast clouds, glowing faintly at night with bioluminescent fire. Whales passed offshore, their songs echoing through the water for miles, deep notes that vibrated through stone and bone alike. Dolphins cut the surface in smooth arcs, exhaling mist that sparkled in sunlight. The ocean floor, invisible to the sky, was patterned with ripples made by currents, marks that could last for years before being smoothed again. Each tide, each wave, each gust of wind played its part in an unbroken cycle that connected continents and carried the memory of every storm and calm. When dusk fell, the transformation began again. The sky turned from gold to violet, and the last light of the sun flashed briefly on the water's edge before fading. The air cooled, the waves darkened, and the sea took on the color of molten glass. The sound deepened too, the rhythm of the surf slower and more deliberate. Stars appeared above, mirrored faintly on the wet sand. Tiny creatures in the shallows began to glow, constellations reflected below as well as above. For those who stood on these ancient shores, the early humans who had followed rivers to their ends, or the animals that came to drink, night by the sea must have felt eternal. The line between land and ocean was the planet's heartbeat made visible, pulsing in and out with the tides, whispering the same story it still tells today, that nothing truly ends, that every wave returns, and that the sea, for all its motion, never forgets. 1 million years ago, ice was the architect of continents. It did not fall or flow like water. It moved with the patience of stone learning to breathe. Across the northern half of the planet, glaciers spread outward from the poles like pale oceans, their surfaces cracked with ridges and veins that caught the faint sunlight. Each sheet of ice was a frozen empire, miles thick, stretching for thousands of miles from mountain to sea. Beneath their weight, the land sank, groaning quietly, its shape changing by inches each century. The world above the ice was silent except for the wind. When it blew, it carried a fine dust of snow that glittered like powdered glass, swirling through the still air until it settled again. The temperature hovered far below freezing even in summer, but there was beauty in the simplicity. Endless horizons of white and silver, the sky a deep blue arc overhead. The light seemed purer there, unfiltered by moisture or smoke, so that every shadow was sharp, every color subdued into serenity. The sun circled low but steady, touching the ice with warmth just enough to make it sparkle and weep in slow, invisible tears. Beneath this frozen surface, the glaciers were alive with motion. Though they appeared still, they crept forward a few feet each year, grinding rock to powder, carving valleys, and sculpting mountains into new forms. As they moved, they carried with them the bones of the earth, boulders, gravel, entire hills, pushing them across continents as if the planet itself were rearranging its furniture. The pressure of their passage polished the stone beneath into smooth plains and deepened old riverbeds into lakes that would one day shine blue in the sunlight. In the quiet darkness at the base of the ice, rivers flowed unseen, carrying meltwater and silt through tunnels that echoed like the inside of a heartbeat. When a glacier finally met the sea, it broke apart in thunderous splinters, birthing icebergs that drifted into open water, their peaks gleaming white while their hidden depths glowed blue-green beneath the waves. Each calving was an event of power and grace, a single instant in a process that had lasted millennia. The air around the glaciers was thin and clear, filled with the scent of snow and stone. The cold shaped everything that lived nearby. Mosses and lichens grew in small circles of color on rocks exposed by the retreating ice, while birds followed the line between frozen and free ground, nesting on cliffs where the wind could not reach their eggs. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses grazed along the edge of the tundra, using their tusks to sweep aside snow in search of grass. Wolves trailed them, their paws spreading wide to walk atop the crusted surface. Every creature that survived here carried its own warmth carefully, conserving energy, resting often, moving only when it mattered. Even sound traveled differently, softer, muted by layers of snow. The crash of distant ice echoed like thunder, rolling across the frozen plains before fading back into silence. Nights glowed with faint auroras, ribbons of green and violet shifting across the stars. Under their light, the world seemed almost unearthly, a dream of blue shadows and silver breath. The glaciers ruled time as well as land. They advanced and retreated with the cycles of the plain. Orbit, erasing old landscapes and revealing new ones. When they melted, they left behind gifts, fertile soil, clear lakes, the raw stone that would one day hold forests and fields. They sculpted the map of the modern world, shaping valleys where cities would stand and carving coastlines that would cradle future seas. To the early humans who watched their slow advance, they must have seemed eternal, walls of ice taller than mountains, moving without hurry but with purpose. Yet even ice obeyed the same rule as everything else on Earth: nothing stays. Every flake that fell carried the memory of an ocean. Every drop that melted began another journey back to the sea. The glaciers of 1 million years ago were not symbols of death but of transformation, the frozen breath of a living planet dreaming itself into shape. The oceans of 1 million years ago were vast, colder, and deeper than the ones we know today. Their surfaces gleamed with an austere beauty, steel blue in color, the sunlight scattering across the ripples like silver dust. From space, they would have looked serene, but beneath that calm skin moved a restless power. The polar seas were rimmed with ice that grew thick in winter and fractured in summer, releasing fields of drifting floes that clinked together softly as the currents carried them away. The air above them was thin and sharp, filled with mist from the breath of the sea. Each iceberg that drifted southward melted slowly, its freshwater mingling with salt to create layers of temperature that shaped entire ecosystems. Beneath the ice, the water glowed in shades of turquoise and shadowed green, lit by faint rays that penetrated through cracks. Life flourished even there, hidden from the sun but fed by nutrients upwelled from the deep. Plankton drifted in clouds so dense they painted the water, forming the foundation of a web of life that spanned every latitude. In the shallower seas of the equator, warmth still ruled. Reefs spread like living continents, their coral branches sculpting labyrinths of color that flickered with fish. Schools of small silver bodies shimmered in sunlight, their coordinated turns forming living ribbons that moved as one. Among them swam larger hunters, sharks, barracuda, and the early ancestors of tuna, sleek and tireless. The coral themselves were ancient builders, colonies of countless tiny creatures creating stone structures that grew by millimeters each year. When storms struck, the waves thundered against these reefs, breaking but not destroying them. Between tempests, the sea calmed to mirror the sky. The tides, pulled by the closer moon, rose and fell more dramatically, flooding mangroves and leaving them exposed again in a rhythm that matched the planet's slow breathing. On those coasts, crabs, snails, and seabirds lived by that pulse, timing their movements to its ancient metronome. Farther out, the open ocean stretched unbroken for thousands of miles. Whales, larger than any other living creature, traced migratory paths that had already become traditions. They moved between feeding grounds rich with plankton in the cold and breeding grounds warmed by the tropics, their songs traveling through the depths like long, slow thoughts. The low moans and pulses they created could be heard for hundreds of miles, weaving through layers of current and echoing off underwater mountains. Dolphins joined their journeys, playful and efficient, following schools of fish that migrated with the changing seasons. Below them, squid and small bioluminescent creatures illuminated the darkness, blinking in complex rhythms that scientists today still struggle to decode. The deep ocean, though unseen, was alive with communication, a silent conversation of light, pressure, and movement. Each level of the sea had its own language, spoken in currents rather than words. The cold of the Ice Age shaped the chemistry of these waters. Oxygen levels were higher, and the circulation of currents more. The sky 1 million years ago was wider and cleaner than any sky we know. It stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon, untouched by smoke or light. Its blue was deeper, almost violet at midday, fading into a silver gray as the sun lowered and the air thickened with evening chill. Clouds moved slowly, shaped by winds that drifted across entire continents before dissolving into the sea. In those days, the atmosphere carried fewer impurities, fewer particles to scatter light, so the colors that filled the sky were pure and rich. At dawn, the world glowed with soft gold. At dusk, it sank into bands of copper, rose, and indigo. The sun itself seemed larger, warmer when it shone and colder when it hid, the difference between light and shadow more absolute. The play of weather across this clean canvas was the planet's oldest form of art. Every storm, every breeze, every drop of rain was part of a pattern that moved with the same slow rhythm as the turning of the earth itself. The winds were constant travelers. They were born from temperature, shaped by mountains, and tamed by forests. Over the oceans, they gathered moisture, rising in spirals that built clouds towering miles high. Over deserts, they gathered dust, turning the air into a shifting haze that dimmed the sun. Sometimes, these winds met and wrestled, forming the great storms that swept across the planet. The rain that followed was heavy, unbroken, drumming against leaves and stone for hours before fading into mist. Thunder rumbled like the voice of the earth, low and distant, and lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the world for a heartbeat. In the colder regions, snow fell instead, soft and steady, each flake a tiny sculpture spinning in silence. The accumulation of snow was the slow promise of glaciers yet to come. Every storm was both destruction and renewal, washing away the dust of old seasons and leaving behind water, the essence of life. Calm days were different kinds of miracles. When the air stilled, the world felt suspended, sound traveling farther and clearer. On such mornings, fog would form along rivers and valleys, wrapping the landscape in white veils. As the sun climbed, it burned through the mist, revealing trees dripping with dew, grasses bowed under the weight of water. Rainbows appeared often, broad and vivid, their colors so strong they seemed solid. In tropical zones, the heat rose until it shimmered, and columns of air lifted birds high into the sky where they circled without effort. Over savannas, dust devils danced harmlessly, swirling golden grass into spirals before dissolving. Every region had its own breath, its own texture of air. In mountain valleys, the wind descended cold and dry. In forests, it carried the scent of resin and soil. Over the sea, it tasted of salt. The atmosphere was a living skin, connecting all things with its invisible touch. When day gave way to night, the transformation was complete. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the sky deepened into a clarity beyond modern memory. The Milky Way stretched from one end of the heavens to the other, a river of white dust flowing through eternity. The moon rose brighter, its light turning rivers to silver and snowfields to glass. The stars were steady, their colors subtle, blue, gold, red, each one ancient beyond comprehension. Meteors flashed without warning, short lives of fire that ended in silence. The auroras painted the poles almost nightly, curtains of color folding and unfolding as the planet's magnetic field played with charged particles from the sun. To the creatures below, the sky must have seemed alive, an immense and shifting dome that breathed light by day and mystery by night. It governed tides, guided migrations, and marked time itself. The weather of 1 million years ago was not a force to be battled or forecast. It was a conversation between earth and air, a slow, unending exchange that shaped the surface of the world and the hearts of those who lived beneath it. If one could stand quietly anywhere on Earth 1 million years ago and simply listen, the planet would reveal its language and sound. It was a conversation of breath and movement, spoken without words but rich with meaning. The first and oldest voice was the wind. It drifted through everything, reshaping cliffs, brushing through forests, crossing plains without rest. Its tone changed with every landscape, a soft sigh through grasslands, a deeper hum through pine forests, a high, hollow whistle around bare peaks. When it swept across the glaciers, it carried fine snow like dust, whispering as it passed. In the tropics it rustled leaves that never stopped growing, each gust stirring countless layers of green. The wind was the planet's pulse made audible, the steady exhalation of a living world. Beneath it, other sounds layered like instruments in an endless composition. Water sang in every key, streams tumbling over stones, rivers murmuring beneath ice, waves striking the shore in rhythmic applause. Even the rain had melody, changing from soft percussion in the forest to a roar when it struck the sea. Every drop was a note in a song that had no beginning and no end. In forests, the music became intricate. The creak of tree trunks, the rustle of leaves, the scratching of small claws on bark. All these formed a texture of sound that filled the air even when no creature spoke. Birds added color to this tapestry. Some called in fluting melodies at dawn, others shrieked sharp warnings from hidden branches. The beating of their wings was soft, like the turning of pages in an unseen book. Insects buzzed, frogs croaked, and monkeys cried through the humid air, creating a chorus that echoed through layers of canopy. At night, the voices changed. Cicadas droned with mechanical patience, and owls called back and forth in tones that seemed to measure the distance between trees. The forest never fell silent. It merely shifted key as the hours passed. Even decay had its sound, the faint fizz of decomposing wood, the drip of moisture from moss to soil. To stand still in that green twilight was to feel surrounded by an orchestra conducted by time itself. The open plains carried a different kind of music. The wind, there was a long, low hum that vibrated through grass taller than a man's shoulders. When herds of animals moved, their hooves added deep, steady rhythm to the air. You could feel the vibration through your bones long before you heard the sound. Birds flew above in looping arcs, their wings slicing the wind with quiet precision. Predators followed the herds at a distance, their soft footfalls barely audible, but the collective tension of hunter and prey created its own silent pressure. In the far distance, thunder sometimes rolled across the sky for miles, so slow and heavy it felt more like a memory than a sound. When rain came to the plains, it drummed evenly on grass and skin alike, a steady cadence that sent every creature to stillness. And when the clouds cleared, the silence that followed was enormous, a silence so complete it seemed to listen back. The deserts spoke in whispers. Their sounds were made of absence, the scrape of sand against stone, the faint hiss of wind through dry canyons, the single call of a bird echoing across distance. At night, the cooling air contracted the ground, and the earth itself clicked and popped softly, releasing the day's heat. In the mountains, sound was clearer, thinner. Rocks cracked under frost, avalanches sighed as snow shifted, and rivers in deep valleys rang like distant bells. Over the oceans, the rhythm was eternal. Waves struck, retreated, struck again, the sea breathing as though alive. Beneath the surface, the clicks of whales and dolphins resonated through miles of water, their calls meeting and blending until the entire ocean seemed to sing. Together, these sounds formed a planet-wide harmony, sometimes loud, sometimes hushed, always perfect. To the first humans, these voices must have been both familiar and divine, a reminder that the earth itself was never silent. Even now, if you close your eyes and listen carefully, a trace of that ancient symphony remains, the murmur of wind, the sigh of rain, the steady heartbeat of the living world. The story of early humans 1 million years ago was not a tale of conquest, but of quiet persistence. They were travelers, wanderers guided by hunger, curiosity, and the subtle signs of the world around them. Their footprints traced paths across continents, faint and unrecorded, yet every step carried the future. In the warmth of Africa, small groups moved along rivers and through forests, following the calls of birds and the smell of distant rain. They knew the land intimately, every bend of a stream, every rock that caught the morning sun. They read the world like a map written in scent, sound, and instinct. When herds of antelope drifted north with the changing seasons, the humans followed, carrying only what they could hold. They left no walls, no cities, no trace but footprints and fire ash. Yet with each generation, they pushed a little farther, across plains where the air shimmered, through forests where light fell in narrow beams, along coasts where the sea sang its endless refrain. Their journey was slow, measured not in years, but in lifetimes. Time itself moved differently then, each day devoted to the rhythm of finding food, warmth, and shelter. As they spread outward, they met new worlds. In colder lands, they learned to wrap themselves in the hides of animals, using bone needles to stitch protection against the wind. They shaped stones with patient precision, learning how different kinds of rock responded to a blow. Obsidian flaked into razor edges, flint cracked clean and sharp. Each tool carried the imprint of its maker's thought. Fire followed them wherever they went, a moving heart of warmth that turned night into safety. Around its light, they roasted meat, hardened spears, and shared unspoken stories. Their languages were still forming, composed of gestures, tone, and the rhythm of breathing, yet meaning passed easily between them. They did not need many words to survive. Understanding came from watching and remembering. The bond between them was unbreakable, woven from necessity and shared experience. In that companionship, the first form of human comfort was born, the knowledge that one was not alone. Migration became the great theme of their existence. Over centuries, groups moved northward out of Africa, crossing narrow land bridges that connected continents when sea levels fell. They followed the curve of rivers through the Middle East, then east into Asia and west toward Europe. Some turned south, settling along the coasts of India and Indonesia, where food was plentiful and the climate kind. Others braved the cold, learning to hunt in snow and find warmth in caves. Wherever they went, they adapted. Their bodies grew broader or leaner depending on the climate. Their skin darkened or lightened with the sun. The world shaped them as gently and relentlessly as wind shapes stone. They did not yet farm or build, but they carried the seeds of both ideas within them. The ability to plan, to imagine, to hope for tomorrow. They began to recognize patterns, the seasons, the stars, the migrations of animals, and with that recognition came the earliest sense of time. The landscapes they crossed were still wild, untouched by the marks of civilization, but they left small signs of their passage. A scatter of bones beside a fire, a broken tool half buried in clay, a handprint on a cave wall. These were not deliberate messages, yet they have endured longer than any written word. Each was a quiet declaration of presence. We were here, and we belonged. They lived close to the edge of survival, but they were not fearful. The earth itself was their companion, teaching them where to find water, when to move, how to listen to the silence between storms. By night, they watched the stars, perhaps sensing their constancy. By day, they walked with the horizon, chasing the line where sky met land. Slowly, unknowingly, they were spreading the light of human awareness across the world, one fire at a time. The journey of those early humans was the beginning of a pattern that would never end: movement, adaptation, and the unspoken belief that somewhere beyond the next hill, the world would continue to welcome them home. To live 1 million years ago was to understand the earth not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Early humans learned to survive not through dominance, but through observation and memory. Every lesson was written in the landscape. The sound of wind warned of storms. The color of the clouds told of coming rain. The smell of the air before dawn revealed whether the day would be dry or cold. They studied animals with patience, noting where herds grazed, how birds flew before a change in weather, when insects vanished before frost. This knowledge was their greatest inheritance, passed through generations not in words, but in habits, gestures, and shared silence. They knew where to dig for roots, how to crack nuts with stones, and which berries promised life or death. Their world demanded constant awareness, yet it gave back abundance to those who listened. The art of survival was not written, it was remembered, and it flowed through blood and bone as naturally as breathing. Fire was their companion, their tool, and their guardian. They discovered it first in lightning strikes and burning trees, learning to carry embers wrapped in leaves to preserve its warmth. Eventually, they learned to coax flame from friction and spark, an act that must have felt like summoning the sun itself. Around the fire, they found community. The circle of light defined safety, beyond it lay the vast unknown. Fire cooked food, softened meat, hardened wooden spear tips, and kept predators at bay. It turned night into a time of rest rather than fear. The glow of flame reflected in their eyes as they sat close together, hands outstretched to the warmth, watching sparks rise into the dark like stars being born. Perhaps in those quiet moments, they began to dream. They saw patterns in the embers and shadows on the cave walls that moved with life. Fire gave them more than heat, it gave them imagination. Stone was their canvas of invention. With patience and instinct, they chipped flakes from larger rocks, shaping blades sharp enough to cut through hide or bone. Each stroke of stone against stone was a small act of creation, guided by rhythm and focus. These tools were simple, but in them lay the blueprint of all future craft. From stone came understanding of structure, symmetry, and control. From cutting meat and scraping hides came clothing, shelters, and the beginnings of art. Bones became needles, sinew became thread, animal fat became fuel for lamps that extended the reach of their nights. They learned to bind spears with resin, to store water in shells, to carry food wrapped in leaves. Nothing was wasted. The smallest fragment of bone or wood found a purpose. Their survival was not luck, it was ingenuity born of necessity and patience. Hunting was as much ritual as need. They tracked with eyes and ears, reading footprints, droppings, and disturbed grass. They moved silently, communicating with glances and gestures. When they succeeded, the kill was honored, not taken for granted. Every part of the animal was used: meat for food, bones for tools, tendons for string, hides for warmth. The act connected them to the cycle of life more intimately than we can imagine. They understood, perhaps better than we do now, that to take life was also to return it. They lived with gratitude, with caution, with awareness that everything around them had power and purpose. The gathering of roots, fruits, and seeds was equally vital, often the work of those who stayed near the camp. They recognized the seasons when certain plants appeared, marking time by their rhythms. These small acts, gathering, carrying, sharing, were the beginning of culture. The first humans survived not by force, but by harmony. They listened to the world and found their place within it. In doing so, they created the foundation of everything to come. The quiet wisdom that life, at its core, depends not on possession but on respect. Long before there were villages, long before words had settled into the shapes we know, there were circles of firelight. These small gatherings were the first communities, clusters of warmth in an immense and often cold world. In the glow of the flame, the air shimmered, turning the night into a sanctuary. Early humans sat close together, their shadows flickering on cave walls and stone. Around them, the forest breathed. Outside, the wind murmured and wolves howled from far away. Inside the circle, there was safety, there was company. Food was shared from hand to hand. Laughter existed as rhythm and breath, and comfort was born from proximity. In those moments, they were not just surviving, they were belonging. These gatherings were the earliest form of home, not built from walls or roofs, but from trust and the instinct to stay close. The sound of another heartbeat nearby was proof that one was not alone against the world's vastness. From these gatherings, language began to grow like a spark finding dry grass. It started with gestures, glances, small sounds, the shared signal for water, for danger, for food. Over time, these signals wove together into patterns, the beginnings of spoken thought. Words were still rough and few, but they carried immense weight. A cry could summon the group. A whisper could soothe a frightened child. Through voice, memory was shared. The old taught the young not just what they knew, but how to feel about it. Which plants healed, which animals to fear, which stars meant the rains were coming. In this exchange, the human mind began to expand. Thought became something that could live outside a single body, passed from one to another like a torch. Knowledge became collective. A community was more than a gathering of bodies. It was the weaving of understanding, the slow building of identity. They learned cooperation not from kindness alone, but from necessity. A single hunter could not face a mammoth, but 10 working together could. One woman could not gather enough fruit to feed her family, but many could fill their baskets and return singing. They began to divide tasks by skill and strength. Some hunted, some prepared, some watched the children or guarded the fire. The sharing of work brought the first rhythm of society, and with it, empathy. When one was sick or injured, others tended to them. When food was scarce, what little they had was distributed. Such acts were not charity, but instinct. The survival of one depended on all. In caring for one another, they began to sense that life had meaning beyond instinct, a quiet understanding that the group was an extension of the self. This was the root of compassion, the first spark of what would one day become humanity's greatest strength. Even in those distant days, signs of ceremony began to appear. The dead were sometimes buried with tools, bones placed carefully beside them, perhaps as gifts for the journey beyond. Flowers were scattered, pigments smeared on walls. No one can say exactly why, but it shows that they had begun to imagine something greater than the visible world. The concept of we extended beyond life, beyond the present moment. The community was not just those who lived, but those who had lived. In this sense of continuity, of lineage, the foundation of culture was laid. Stories were told by firelight, not written, but remembered, shaped by voice and memory. Tales of great hunts, of storms survived, of spirits in the mountains and voices in the rain. These stories became the heartbeat of the group, lessons wrapped in wonder. The first communities were not kingdoms or tribes. They were families bound by shared survival and the fragile miracle of understanding. In the darkness of the ancient world, they found each other, and in doing so, they found themselves. Imagination began quietly. It did not arrive in a single moment of brilliance, but grew slowly, like moss spreading across stone. 1 million years ago, when the nights were long and the fire burned low, the first humans began to see more than what their eyes could measure. They looked into the flames and saw shapes, animals, faces, shadows moving in rhythm with the flicker of light. Perhaps they wondered if those shapes meant something, if the fire itself had a soul. The world around them was alive in ways they could not explain. Thunder that spoke without a tongue, wind that sang through the trees, rivers that whispered secrets to the stones they carried. To understand it, they began to imagine, to fill the spaces between what they knew and what they felt. Imagination was born from curiosity, from awe, and from fear. It gave form to the unseen, purpose to the unknown. It was the moment the human mind learned not just to observe the world, but to dream of what might lie beyond it. The first artists were not seeking beauty, they were seeking memory. On the walls of caves, they traced outlines of their hands, leaving red and black prints made from crushed ochre and ash. Some painted animals, mammoths, deer, lions, creatures they hunted or admired, rendered in sweeping lines that seemed to move when the firelight danced. The cave became a world within a world, a sacred place where imagination could breathe. These images were more than decoration. They were communication across time, messages to those not yet born. A painted bison might have said, "We were here. We saw this. We understood." In the rhythm of their hands against stone, humanity's first art was both prayer and proof that thought could outlast the body. When the pigments dried, the walls became the first pages of a story still being written. Music followed soon after, born from the simple act of rhythm. A stick striking wood, stones clacking together, voices rising and falling in the dark. They learned that sound could carry emotion, joy, grief, warning, hope. Around the fire, they discovered harmony, the joining of voices into one sound greater than any alone. The beat of hands on skin echoed the heartbeat itself, and in that rhythm they found connection. Some scholars would later call it culture, but for them it was life, a natural extension of breathing, walking, and watching. When storms came, they mimicked thunder. When animals roared, they answered in kind. These imitations blurred the line between art and ritual, between survival and expression. Music was the first language of the soul, carrying meaning long before speech could. It was how humans first felt their shared pulse, the sound of belonging. From imagination came belief. The more they dreamed, the more they sensed that the world was layered with meaning, that spirits lived in trees, that fire had power, that stars watched from above. Every mystery demanded a story. The moon became a hunter, the sun a giver of life, the wind a messenger between worlds. These were not yet religions, but seeds of wonder planted in fertile minds. They gave comfort to the fearful and purpose to the uncertain. Imagination became a refuge, a bridge between what was and what could be. It allowed humans to see beyond hunger and shelter, to think in terms of beauty, memory, and eternity. Through imagination, they became not just inhabitants of Earth, but storytellers of it. They began to understand that they were part of something vast and connected, a living story unfolding across the stars. In every painted handprint, every song, every whispered myth, the human spirit first declared itself awake. And in that awakening, the world began to change forever. The Earth 1 million years ago was a living canvas in constant motion, and as early humans wandered farther across its surface, both they and the planet began to change together. The cycles of ice and warmth continued their slow rhythm, sculpting mountains, reshaping rivers, expanding and swallowing coastlines. Glaciers advanced, carving valleys with patient strength, while elsewhere, The heat of the sun awakened the rainforests and filled the grasslands with the hum of life. The continents were alive with transition. Africa's plains pulsed with migrations, herds of animals moving like tides across the horizon. Europe shifted between frozen desert and green forest. Asia's winds blew dust from the steppes into the sea, while South America's jungles thickened with vines that tangled into endless green cathedrals. The earth was never still, and humans learned to move with it, following food, warmth, and shelter, never holding claim to any one place for long. In their motion, they became part of the planet's pulse, travelers not upon the earth, but within it. As they moved, they left small marks, faint at first, footprints along riverbanks, ashes where fires had burned, bones scattered near caves. With time, those traces grew. Each settlement, however temporary, changed the land around it in subtle ways. Paths formed through grass from repeated steps. Hunting thinned herds in one place, encouraging them to migrate elsewhere. The discarded seeds of fruits they ate sometimes sprouted into small groves, and their fires cleared patches of land that later filled with new growth. Without intention, humans became gardeners of the wild. The earth began to respond to their presence, folding their habits into its endless cycles. The air around their camps was filled with smoke and laughter. The ground beneath them warmed from sleeping bodies. Though their tools were simple and their numbers small, their relationship with the planet was intimate. They were shaping the earth, and the earth was shaping them. This quiet exchange between land and life was the beginning of a partnership that would one day redefine the world. The climate's slow shifts demanded adaptability. When cold descended again, forests retreated, and open plains expanded. Rivers froze, and rain turned to snow for years at a time. Early humans huddled deeper into caves, crafting thicker clothing, storing food, and learning to endure long winters. When the ice retreated, warmth returned like a promise, bringing floods that renewed the soil. They followed the meltwaters into new valleys, discovering lakes where glaciers had once rested. Each generation watched the land transform. A mountain revealed where once there had been ice, a river diverted by fallen rock. These changes taught them humility. They did not yet seek to master the world, because the world was far too immense to master. Instead, they learned its moods, anticipating its breath the way one learns the patterns of a friend. They became observers of change, custodians of experience, carrying with them stories of where the grass grew tall, where the rivers ran deep, where warmth always returned first after the cold. In time, the balance between humans and nature became something delicate, almost sacred. The earth provided, and they took only what was needed. They respected the hunt, the harvest, and the flame. Each death was acknowledged, each meal a ceremony of gratitude. They learned that waste was dangerous, that greed disrupted the order of things. This awareness bound them not just to their environment, but to one another. It created a quiet ethic, an understanding that survival was shared, and that every action echoed beyond the moment. In that fragile equilibrium, the planet thrived. The forests regrew, rivers cleansed themselves, animals multiplied, and the air remained pure. The world of 1 million years ago was still untamed, still vast beyond comprehension, but already it was listening to the footsteps of its most curious creation. Humanity and the earth were growing together, side by side, shaping each other in the slow, patient language of time. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about coexistence, awareness, and the dawning realization that life itself was one continuous thread, weaving all beings into the same endless design. As centuries passed, the bond between early humans and the world around them deepened into something almost spiritual. They had no words for worship, no temples or priests, yet their lives were steeped in reverence. To them, the earth was not a possession but a presence, vast, living, and eternal. Every mountain was a guardian, every river a giver of life. The sky above was a ceiling that spoke in thunder and light, and the ground beneath was a cradle that fed and carried them. The first sense of connection was not belief, but recognition, the quiet realization that they were not separate from the world, but made of it. The same rain that filled their water skins ran through their veins. The same dust that clung to their feet would one day reclaim their bones. In every breath of wind, they felt the movement of something larger than themselves. This awareness was their first form of spirituality, born not from doctrine, but from awe. They began to honor the forces that shaped their lives. When the hunt was successful, they left pieces of meat behind as gifts to the spirits of the animals. When storms passed without harm, they sang softly into the wind. Gratitude carried on their voices. Fire, the companion that had kept them alive for generations, became sacred. Its light symbolized warmth. Seasons grew predictable, migrations reliable, rains steady. It was as though the planet itself recognized their respect and gave stability in return. For countless generations, this harmony endured, a quiet partnership between humanity and nature that defined what it meant to be alive. They did not yet know of history or progress, but they knew belonging. They understood the truth that modern hearts still chase. That peace is not found in what we control, but in what we accept. The dawn of connection was not marked by invention or discovery, but by awareness, a still moment when the human spirit looked upon the living world and whispered, without fear or demand, "We are the same." Life a million years ago moved to the rhythm of seasons, a slow, circular dance that carried all living things from birth to death and back again. To early humans, time was not counted in numbers or measured by calendars. It was felt in the air, seen in the changing color of leaves, and heard in the calls of animals. Spring was not a date. It was the scent of thawing earth, the return of birds, the first shoots breaking through soil softened by the sun. Summer arrived with long days that stretched lazily across the horizon, bringing warmth and abundance. Autumn came as a sigh, the air cooling, the grass turning gold, and fruit hanging heavy on the branches. Winter followed like sleep, a season of quiet, when the world rested beneath snow and silence. These changes were not interruptions, but reminders, gentle transitions that showed that every ending was only another beginning. The people of that time lived inside this pattern. They did not fight the seasons, they flowed with them. In their hearts, the cycle of nature became the cycle of life itself. Birth was a sacred mystery, witnessed with awe and gratitude. Each new child was a spark of warmth against the cold, a continuation of something larger than the individual. The entire group shared in the care of infants, protecting them. In this endless repetition, humanity found peace. Every sunrise was familiar yet new. Every sunset a promise that morning would return. They learned to see beauty in impermanence, in melting ice, falling leaves, the flicker of a flame that would soon fade. Through the seasons, they came to understand the essence of existence, that the world did not move toward an ending, but continued forever in cycles of change. To them, eternity was not distant or abstract. It was present in every ripple of water, every gust of wind, every birth, and every death. The seasons of life were not something to endure. They were the sacred rhythm of being, the heartbeat of a living planet that carried everything within its patient, eternal embrace. 1 million years ago, balance was not an idea. It was the nature of existence itself. Every leaf, every grain of sand, every breath of wind played a role in keeping the world whole. Nothing lived for itself alone. The wolf needed the deer needed the grass needed the sun, and the sun, though far away, needed the turning of the earth to complete its purpose. It was a web so perfect, so precise, that even silence had meaning within it. Death was never waste. The fallen became soil, the soil fed roots, and those roots lifted new life toward the sky. The air carried seeds, rain carried minerals, rivers carried memory. In this endless exchange, the planet maintained its calm, a vast equilibrium that moved without hurry, adjusting itself like a musician tuning an ancient instrument. The world did not strive for perfection, it simply existed in rhythm. Every imbalance was temporary, every storm followed by stillness, every hunger eventually answered. The balance of nature was not imposed. It was simply the way things were meant to be. To the humans who lived within it, this harmony was as invisible as air, yet they felt it deeply. They knew that to take too much was to break the thread that held all things together. When they hunted, they did so with restraint. When they gathered, they left enough behind for the forest to renew itself. They used fire carefully, tending it as they would a living being. Their tools, simple but efficient, were shaped from stone, wood, and bone, all gifts from the earth. They built nothing permanent, for permanence was not their goal. Instead, they moved as the world moved, settling near rivers until they dried, then following the water to its new course. They understood instinctively that ownership was an illusion. The land belonged to no one and everyone at once. This was their philosophy, unspoken but practiced daily: to live lightly, to leave little behind, to give back as much as was taken. It was not morality. It was awareness, born from living close enough to feel the planet breathe. In the forests, the balance revealed itself in cycles of quiet exchange. Trees reached upward toward sunlight while their roots intertwined below, sharing water and nutrients through unseen networks of fungi. When one tree fell, others grew stronger from its decay. The forest never mourned its dead. It transformed them into nourishment. On the plains, predators kept herds moving, preventing overgrazing and keeping the soil alive. In the sea, whales fed plankton through the nutrients they released when they dived and surfaced. Even the smallest insects played their part, pollinating flowers, breaking down waste, spreading seeds. Every life touched another, directly or unseen, forming a pattern more intricate than any tapestry ever woven by human hands. If one thread broke, others compensated, adjusting, healing, restoring. The earth was self-sustaining, endlessly generous and endlessly forgiving, so long as its rhythm was respected. The early humans learned from this balance not through thought, but through experience. When they lived within nature's order, the world provided. When they disrupted it, hunger and hardship followed. The lesson was simple, but profound. Harmony was survival. They saw it in the way the moon pulled the tides, in the return of birds after the long winter, in the renewal of grass after fire. The universe itself seemed to whisper the truth, that everything alive was part of one great circle, and that the secret to existence was not control, but cooperation. They lived this truth in every gesture, every journey. Their footprints faded quickly from the ground. Their fires turned to ash, but the world continued unchanged because of their care. The balance of nature was not something they sought to preserve. It was something they trusted completely. It was both their teacher and their mirror, proof that the greatest wisdom lies not in invention, but in belonging. And as the sun set each day over a planet untouched by greed or fear, the earth exhaled softly, whole and complete within itself. When night fell 1 million years ago, the world transformed. The light of day gave way to something older, gentler, and infinite. The air cooled and thickened, the wind softened, and the earth seemed to hold its breath. Shadows lengthened until they became the world itself, and the first stars blinked awake, one by one, like ancient eyes opening after a long rest. For early humans, the night was not something to fear. It was a mystery to respect. They gathered near the fire, the glow wrapping them in warmth, while beyond the circle, the wilderness stretched into darkness. Above, the sky unfolded in all directions, deeper than the ocean, richer than imagination. The Milky Way arched overhead, a river of white dust flowing endlessly through blackness. Every spark of light shimmered with purpose. They did not know what stars were, but they knew that they mattered. The night sky was a living map, a clock, a memory written across the heavens. It told them when to move, when to rest, when the rains would return, and when the herds would come again. It was both compass and companion. The moon ruled these nights, changing shape with time's patient hand. Sometimes it was a thin curve of silver, sometimes a full white coin glowing so bright it painted the world in pale light. Its pull moved the tides, guided travelers along coasts, and stirred something wordless within the human heart. Children fell asleep under its watch, hunters moved by its light. When it vanished into darkness, people looked upward and waited, trusting that it would return as it always had. The moon's cycle became the first calendar, its phases marking the rhythm of months and memory. Some groups carved its shapes into bone or stone, small tokens of time kept close to the body. In the moon's calm face, they saw reflection, change and constancy coexisting, just as life and death did on Earth. It was a reminder that even the heavens breathed. When the fire burned low and the night deepened, imagination stirred. The people looked at the stars and began to draw lines between them. They saw animals, hunters, rivers, and spirits. The patterns became stories, and the stories became guides. One constellation might mark the path of migrating birds, another, the return of warmth after the cold. The stars became symbols of hope, fixed points in a changing world. They seemed eternal, unblinking, witnesses to everything that lived and died below. To look at them was to feel both small and infinite, part of a vast design that stretched beyond understanding. The sky gave them perspective, the sense that while their fires might fade, their story was written among those distant lights, glowing quietly for eternity. Silence ruled these nights, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of those who slept. Occasionally, a meteor would streak across the sky, burning for a heartbeat before disappearing, leaving a memory too brief to name. In those moments, someone might have whispered a wish or a prayer, though no one yet called it that. The night was both teacher and comforter. It reminded them of balance, of stillness after motion, rest after work, peace after hunger. They learned to trust it as much as the day. In its darkness, they were safe not because they controlled it, but because they belonged to it. The stars above did not judge or promise, they simply were. Their patience was infinite, their message clear. The world was vast, but not empty. Every flicker of flame, every breath of wind, every sleeping soul beneath that boundless sky was part of something timeless. To lie beneath those stars was to feel the pulse of the universe itself, steady, slow, eternal, the heartbeat of creation, the quiet lullaby that carried the earth into sleep. When the first humans slept beneath the stars, their dreams were the language of the soul before speech existed. They did not understand the border between waking and sleeping. To them, both worlds were real, both filled with meaning. As the fire faded to embers and the night deepened, the hum of the earth seemed to sink into their bones, and the rhythm of their breathing matched the slow heartbeat of the planet itself. In that stillness, their minds began to wander beyond the visible world. They dreamed of the hunt, of rivers that ran forever, of fires that never died. They dreamed of voices calling from the wind, of animals that spoke, of ancestors who walked through the moonlight and touched their foreheads with invisible hands. These dreams were not just images, they were experiences, vivid and alive, more real than memory. In them, fear met comfort, mystery met understanding. The dreams of early humans were the first stories, the first myths whispered to the heart before the tongue could shape them. When dawn arrived, the boundary between dream and reality blurred. They woke with the smell of smoke, the sound of water nearby, and the warmth of the first sun. Their dreams followed them into the day like shadows that never faded. Perhaps they believed that dreams were messages from the sky, from the earth, from the animals they shared their world with. If one dreamed of rain, they might look to the horizon with hope. If one dreamed of fire or falling, they took caution. Dreams were guides, omens, and sometimes comfort. In their simplicity, early humans were closer to the unconscious truth of the world, that thought and nature were not separate, that imagination was another form of survival. They carried their dreams like tools, shaping behavior and belief. A vision in the night could change the direction of a journey, the choice of a hunting ground, or the telling of a story. Dreams became the first teachers, speaking in symbols instead of words. In sleep, their minds gathered the pieces of the day, the chase, the hunger, the laughter, the fear, and turned them into meaning. The memory of an animal became a spirit. The echo of thunder became a god. They began to sense that everything had life, trees that sighed in wind, rivers that sang, mountains that dreamed in their own slow way. From this perception grew the seed of empathy, the ability to imagine the feelings of another being. It was in dreaming that humanity first learned compassion, first understood that the world was not built around them, but with them. The dreamer and the dream became one, both reflections of the same mysterious consciousness that pulsed through every living thing. Even now, this understanding lingers in us, the quiet belief that our dreams connect us to something larger, older, eternal. Night after night, generation after generation, dreams shaped their inner worlds. A child might dream of running beside a lion and wake fearless. A hunter might dream of his lost companion and feel him near again. These experiences became sacred, proof that death was not final and that time could bend. Around fires, they began to share these visions, comparing what they had seen in sleep. From those exchanges, stories emerged, of sky and sea, of spirits and ancestors. These were the first myths, born not from invention, but from shared experience. Dreaming became the bridge between the visible and invisible worlds, a secret place where all knowledge began. In dreams, they rehearsed survival, shaped courage, and practiced hope. They saw themselves not as separate from nature, but as threads in its fabric, woven tightly and beautifully into the whole. The dreams of early humanity were not escapes from reality. They were mirrors of it, reflections of a planet alive, conscious, and dreaming through them. And as the stars faded and morning came, the earth, too, seemed to awaken, breathing, watching, and remembering. Curiosity was humanity's first true fire, invisible, quiet, but unstoppable. Long before tools grew complex or words grew many, the first humans began to wonder. They wondered at everything. The way water reflected the sky, the way thunder spoke from nowhere, the way shadows stretched and folded with the passing sun. They had lived among these mysteries for countless generations, but now, something in their minds began to stir, a desire not only to witness, but to understand. It was curiosity that set them apart, that whispered there might be reasons hidden beneath the rhythm of the world. When they saw sparks leap from stones, they struck them again, watching light bloom from impact. When they saw branches float on rivers, they followed them, learning how water carried and shaped the land. Every sound, every color, every change in wind became a question, and every discovery, no matter how small, was a victory. This was the beginning of knowledge, not written or spoken, but lived, tested, and felt through the fingertips. Curiosity made them explorers. It urged them to climb hills just to see what lay beyond. It pulled them toward the horizon, across deserts, forests, and ice. Each new place revealed wonders and dangers alike. New animals, new plants, new shapes of land and sky. They learned through observation, through patience. When one of them discovered that stones of different shapes made different sounds when struck, they learned rhythm. When another noticed that footprints hardened in mud and left impressions, they learned about permanence. When they found that fire could be used not only for warmth but to shape tools and cook food, they began to understand transformation. The world became a teacher, and their curiosity, its pupil. In this simple exchange, progress was born, not through ambition, but through wonder. They were still small in number, still fragile against nature's moods, yet their minds had begun to reach beyond survival. They no longer only lived within the world. They began to ask why it was the way it was. As curiosity deepened, so did imagination's reach. They began to combine knowledge with invention. Stones were shaped more purposefully. Fire was carried more efficiently. They learned how to store warmth, how to shape wood into tools, how to weave branches into shelters that bent with the wind instead of breaking. They studied the sky, noticing how the moon's phases matched the rhythms of the tides, how the stars shifted through the year. Patterns revealed themselves everywhere, and through recognition, understanding blossomed. Curiosity gave rise to foresight, the ability to prepare, to anticipate, to plan for tomorrow. This was the quiet revolution of the human mind, the birth of time itself, the awareness of before and after, cause and effect. They began to carry thoughts the way they carried embers, protecting them, nurturing them, and passing them on. The first teachers were not chiefs or elders, but those who asked why, the ones who looked at the world and saw possibility instead of repetition. This growing awareness did not distance them from nature. It bound them closer to it. To understand the world was to love it more deeply. They marveled at the precision of a bird's flight, the symmetry of shells. They learned through observation, through patience. When one of them discovered that stones of different shapes made different sounds when struck, they learned rhythm. When another noticed that footprints hardened in mud and left impressions, they learned about permanence. When they found that fire could be used not only for warmth but to shape tools and cook food, they began to understand transformation. The world became a teacher, and their curiosity, its pupil. In this simple exchange, progress was born, not through ambition, but through wonder. They were still small in number, still fragile against nature's moods, yet their minds had begun to reach beyond survival. They no longer only lived within the world. They began to ask why it was the way it was. As curiosity deepened, so did imagination's reach. They began to combine knowledge with invention. Stones were shaped more purposefully. Fire was carried more efficiently. They learned how to store warmth, how to shape wood into tools, how to weave branches into shelters that bent with the wind instead of breaking. They studied the sky, noticing how the moon's phases matched the rhythms of the tides, how the stars shifted through the year. Patterns revealed themselves everywhere, and through recognition, understanding blossomed. Curiosity gave rise to foresight, the ability to prepare, to anticipate, to plan for tomorrow. This was the quiet revolution of the human mind, the birth of time itself, the awareness of before and after, cause and effect. They began to carry thoughts the way they carried embers, protecting them, nurturing them, and passing them on. The first teachers were not chiefs or elders, but those who asked why, the ones who looked at the world and saw possibility instead of repetition. The way rivers curved as though following invisible paths. Their discoveries brought not arrogance, but humility, the recognition that the world's design was far greater than any mind could hold. Yet they kept learning, not out of need, but out of joy. Curiosity became humanity's most sacred inheritance, the silent fire that burned even in the coldest nights. It was the spark that would carry them through ages of change, guiding them from stone to star. But in this ancient time, its light was still small and pure, untouched by greed or ambition. It existed as a gentle hunger, the wish to know, to see, to feel, and to understand. And though countless generations have passed since then, that same quiet fire still lives within every one of us. The eternal echo of those first minds who looked upon the world with open eyes and whispered softly to the dawn, "What if?" Water has always been the Earth's most patient artist. 1,000,000 years ago, it moved through the world as both sculptor and song, carving valleys, shaping mountains, and weaving its way through every living thing. To early humans, water was life itself, a gift, a mirror, and a mystery. They followed its path instinctively, settling beside rivers, walking along lakes, and listening to its rhythm as if it spoke in a language older than thought. In its stillness, it reflected the sky perfectly. In motion, it whispered stories of distance and return. Every droplet that touched their skin had traveled countless miles, fallen as rain, frozen as ice, melted into streams, and found its way back again. They could not have known the science of it, but they felt its sacred pattern. To drink was to join that eternal cycle, to take into themselves the same element that moved through clouds, soil, and sea. Water was the pulse of the planet, and they lived within its rhythm as naturally as breath. Rivers were their guides. Flowing from the high places to the low, they carved paths that connected every landscape, mountains to forests, forests to plains, plains to oceans. Early humans followed these veins of the earth, learning that where water went, life followed. Fish darted through the shallows, birds nested in reeds, and animals gathered to drink. The riverbanks offered food, shelter, and direction. Even their sound was comfort, a constant murmur that filled the silence of long nights. The flow of a river was time made visible, endless but never the same. They noticed how water remembered every journey, carrying fallen leaves, pieces of bark, and reflections of clouds across great distances. Sometimes it moved with fury, roaring after storms. Sometimes it crept silently under ice, unseen but persistent. In both moods, it reminded them that strength could be gentle, that power need not shout to endure. The river became their teacher, its lessons flowing quietly in every ripple and wave. Rain, too, was sacred. When the first drops fell after long dryness, faces lifted instinctively to the sky. It was more than relief, it was renewal. The scent of wet soil, the drumming of water on leaves, the shimmer of droplets clinging to grass, all of it carried a sense of blessing. The people knew that rain meant life reborn, plants greening overnight, rivers swelling, animals returning to drink. They learned to read its signs, the gathering of clouds, the coolness of air, the distant scent of ozone. They came to trust its rhythm, even when it did not come when expected. Droughts taught them patience, floods taught them humility. In time, they saw that the same water that nourished could also destroy, washing away camps, scattering herds, changing the shape of the land. But even in its anger, water was never cruel. It took only to give again. It was balance in motion, destruction and creation woven into a single, endless act. The ocean, where all waters met, was both wonder and fear. Standing at its edge, they watched waves rise and fall like breathing. The sea, stretched beyond sight, vast and alive, its moods changing with the wind. To them, it was a living being, restless, powerful, eternal. Its salt touched their tongues and stayed with them, a taste of the planet's heart. The tides followed the moon's command, a rhythm as certain as the pulse in their veins. The ocean connected everything, land to land, sky to sky, and even those who never saw it could feel its pull through the rivers that led there. At night, the waves reflected starlight, and the horizon disappeared, leaving only sound, the steady hush of infinity. Water was their first symbol of time, always moving, always returning, never the same, yet always familiar. It reminded them that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. Every drop of rain, every river, every tide was part of the same eternal flow, the heartbeat of Earth, the song that never stopped. Fire was the first miracle humanity could hold in its hands. It was both the simplest and most mysterious of gifts, born from friction, from spark, from lightning's brief touch upon dry grass. 1 million years ago, when the world was still ruled by darkness and cold, fire became a companion, a protector, and a teacher. Its light changed everything. The night no longer belonged entirely to the wild. The shadows that once hid predators now danced in harmless patterns on cave walls. Around it, warmth gathered, drawing humans together like moths circling their sun. For the first time, they could rest without fear, extend the day beyond the horizon's glow. Fire became the center of existence, a small, flickering heart around which life reorganized itself. It illuminated not only the faces of those who kept it, but the unseen corners of the mind, the beginnings of reflection and meaning. They learned to keep it alive as though it were a living being. It needed food, air, and care. They built small nests of dry leaves and twigs, coaxing embers into flame with breath as gentle as prayer. They guarded it from rain, carried it from place to place wrapped in bark or ember stone, passing it between generations as though it were lineage itself. In its glow, they saw both beauty and danger. They understood that what warmed could also destroy, what gave life could take it away. The forest fires that followed storms were reminders of that balance. walls of flames sweeping through trees, devouring everything but leaving the ground fertile in their wake. Fire was not evil, nor was it good. It was pure energy, indifferent yet essential, just like the sun. To master it was to enter a new covenant with nature, one that demanded respect and discipline. In those early hands, the spark of fire became the spark of control, the first quiet step toward civilization. The glow of the flame changed the rhythm of human life. With light at night, they could work longer, talk longer, dream longer. It became the center of community, the heart of every gathering. Stories were told in its warmth, tales of hunts, of stars, of ancestors who had taught them how to live. Children listened with eyes wide, their faces lit gold and orange, the fire's reflection flickering like thought itself. Around it, laughter echoed softly. Around it, silence felt sacred. It was more than warmth. It was companionship, memory, and hope. The fire's voice was gentle but constant, the soft crackle of wood reminding them that even in stillness, the world was alive. Sometimes they watched the sparks rise into the sky and fade among the stars, wondering if they too carried messages, if the heavens noticed the little lights below. In this way, fire connected the earth to the cosmos, grounding them while teaching them to look up. With fire, they began to shape the world. They cooked meat, unlocking flavors and strength they had never known. They hardened tools in its heat, bent wood, and shaped stone. They used its smoke to preserve food, to keep insects away, to signal one another across distances. Fire became their language of mastery, the first tool that worked not through strength, but through knowledge. Yet they never forgot its wildness. When it raged out of control, it reminded them of their smallness, of how quickly creation could return to chaos. This humility kept reverence alive. They thanked the fire when it served, feared it when it roared, and trusted it always to return when needed. In time, it became a symbol of warmth, of life, of transformation. It burned in their hearths and in their hearts, a living echo of the sun that sustained them. The fire within was not just flame but spirit, the eternal reminder that light, once kindled, must be protected. It was both the promise and the warning of what humanity could become, creators and destroyers, bound forever to the same spark. Long before there were words to describe it, the earth spoke. Its voice was vast and patient, woven into every sound that filled the air. It spoke in the wind that carried whispers through grass, in the low rumble of distant thunder, in the endless rhythm of waves meeting the shore. To the first humans, these sounds were not background noise. They were conversation, messages from a living world. They listened as they walked, as they hunted, as they slept. When the mountains groaned with ice, they heard warning. When birds fell silent before a storm, they knew to find shelter. The world did not need language. Its meaning was felt in vibration and tone. The crack of lightning, the sigh of rain, the howl of wolves in the dark, all were part of a single, endless dialogue between earth and life. To listen was to survive, but more than that, it was to belong. Every sound carried intention, every silence, significance. The planet breathed, sang, and dreamed, and humanity, still young, learned to listen with reverence. The ground itself had a voice. Sometimes it trembled, shifting with the deep motions of stone. When it cracked, the sound rolled through valleys like distant drums, slow and heavy. The people did not yet understand tectonic force, but they felt the presence beneath their feet, something vast, powerful, and awake. In certain places, the earth exhaled through hot springs and vents, sending steam twisting into the air. They gathered around these places, curious and cautious, sensing both danger and mystery. The smell of minerals, the hiss of heat, the shimmer of rising vapor. These were sacred signs, proof that the world was alive below the surface. Volcanoes, too, spoke in fire. When mountains bled molten light, the people stood at safe distances, watching with awe. They saw the same glow they tended in their fires, but grander, angrier, older. To them, such moments were the voice of the planet itself, speaking in a tongue made of thunder and flame. The forests had their own language, softer but no less profound. Leaves rustled with secrets, branches creaked in the wind like slow speech. The hum of insects, the distant call of birds, the echo of footsteps on hollow roots. It was a language without silence. To walk among trees was to enter a conversation already in progress. When the wind shifted, it brought news, the scent of rain, the movement of animals, the change of seasons. Rivers murmured, stones clicked underfoot, and each sound carried a kind of wisdom. Even the smallest noises had weight: the breaking of a twig, the splash of a fish, the sigh of soil as it drank the rain. The earth's voice was everywhere, layered and complex, yet harmonized perfectly. Early humans learned to read this music not through study, but through listening. It became instinct, a deep awareness that every sound, every vibration, every tremor was part of the same grand rhythm that bound all things together. At night, when the fires burned low and the wind settled, the voice of the earth grew softer but clearer. The crackle of cooling stones, the distant echo of water, the whisper of grass bending under the weight of dew. It was a lullaby older than memory. They lay under the stars and heard the planet breathing, its sighs carried through soil and air. Some said the earth slept, others believed it watched over them, awake even when they rested. Either way, they felt its presence as comfort, a steady hum that never ceased. The voice of the earth was not something to command or control. It was something to honor, to live alongside, to learn from. It reminded them that they were part of something immense, something alive and aware. And though ages would pass, and humanity would one day forget how to listen, the earth's song would never fade. It would continue beneath footsteps and engines, beneath cities and silence, whispering the same truth it spoke 1,000,000 years ago. I am here. I am alive. And so are you. Above them stretched a sky so vast, it seemed to have no end. 1,000,000 years ago, when no smoke, no towers, no lights touched the horizon, the heavens were pure and endless. By day, the sky was a deep, living blue, not flat, but layered with shifting tones, growing pale near the horizon where air thickened with light. Clouds moved slowly, shaped by winds that crossed entire continents, their shadows sweeping over plains and mountains like passing thoughts. They were not just decoration. They were the sky's own language. To those who watched, their forms carried meaning: the promise of rain, the threat of storm, the calm of stillness. Every change in the air told a story. The rising of mist from rivers at dawn, the shimmer of heat at noon, the deepening red of twilight, all were moments in the sky's eternal dance. To early humans, who looked upward as they walked, it was impossible not to feel awe. The sky was their roof, their compass, their dream. At night, when the fires burned low and the wind settled, the voice of the earth grew softer but clearer. The crackle of cooling stones, the distant echo of water, the whisper of grass bending under the weight of dew. It was a lullaby older than memory. They lay under the stars and heard the planet breathing, its sighs carried through soil and air. Some said the earth slept, others believed it watched over them, awake even when they rested. Either way, they felt its presence as comfort, a steady hum that never ceased. The voice of the earth was not something to command or control. It was something to honor, to live alongside, to learn from. It reminded them that they were part of something immense, something alive and aware. And though ages would pass, and humanity would one day forget how to listen, the earth's song would never fade. It would continue beneath footsteps and engines, beneath cities and silence, whispering the same truth it spoke 1,000,000 years ago. I am here. I am alive. And so are you. The sky gave them wonder, but also belonging. To look upward was to feel both small and complete, part of something vast, yet welcoming. The wind that touched their faces was the same wind that brushed the clouds. The air that filled their lungs had passed through trees, mountains, and seas. They were connected not only to the earth below, but to the expanse above. Each sunrise was a renewal, each sunset a reminder that endings were only transformations. The sky's colors became symbols: gold for warmth, blue for peace, red for change, black for rest. These meanings would echo through all future ages, carried unconsciously in the human heart. For in truth, the endless sky was more than a view, it was a mirror. When early humans lifted their gaze, they saw their own reflection: curiosity, fear, hope, and eternity looking back. Beneath that infinite dome, they learned the quiet truth of existence, that all things, from dust to stars, are made of the same light, moving together through time. And in that knowing, they found peace. Time, to the first humans, was not a number, nor a line that stretched forward without end. It was a circle, a rhythm, a slow turning that connected all things. They could not measure it, but they could feel it, in the rising of the sun, the growing of grass, the return of rain. Each day was a small revolution, each season a verse in a song that never stopped. Morning carried the scent of dew and the promise of warmth. Noon shimmered with heat and hunger. Evening came with long shadows, soft light, and rest. Then night returned, wrapping the world in darkness until the first glow of dawn. This rhythm was steady, eternal. The people did not count days, they lived them. They marked time by what changed: the ripening of fruit, the migration of animals, the birth and death of those they loved. Their memories were not bound to dates, but to cycles, to patterns that repeated with quiet precision. The earth's turning was the pulse of life itself, and they moved in perfect step with it. As their awareness grew, they began to see time in larger scales. They noticed how rivers carved deeper channels as years passed, how trees widened and thickened, how stones crumbled and turned to dust. They saw the stars shift slightly in the sky from one season to the next and realized that even the heavens moved in long, slow patterns. They began to remember stories from their elders, tales of great winters and long summers, of rivers that once ran where plains now lay. These memories were the beginning of history, carried not in writing but in word and rhythm. Each generation added its verse to the song of time, passing it to the next. Through story, they learned that they were part of something greater than themselves, that their lives were threads in a tapestry that reached far beyond their sight. The past was not gone. It lived in every stone, every echo, every breath of wind. Time was not an arrow, but a wheel, turning endlessly, connecting beginnings and endings in one graceful motion. They measured time not by clocks, but by change. The moon's waxing and waning told them when to hunt, when to rest. The angle of sunlight through branches revealed the passing of seasons. The cries of migrating birds, the colors of leaves, the scents carried by the wind, all were signs of time's movement. To them, time was alive, woven into everything they touched. It was the teacher and the student, the giver and the taker. When they sat beside a dying fire and watched the last embers fade, they understood time as transformation, not loss. When they saw a fallen tree feeding new shoots, they saw time's generosity. The cycle of birth, death, and renewal became the core of their understanding. Nothing truly vanished. Everything returned in another form. Even the stars that vanished with dawn would reappear with night, reminding them that endings were only intervals in an unending rhythm. Through this awareness, humanity gained its first sense of destiny. The world no longer felt random. It had order, balance, continuity. Each sunrise connected them to the ancestors who had watched it before, and each sunset prepared them for those who would come after. Time became a comfort, a promise that life continued, even when individual lives faded. They began to mark sacred places, stones stacked where the sun rose, carvings made where shadows fell longest. These were not calendars, but offerings of gratitude to the rhythm that sustained them. Time was their invisible God, kind and patient, reminding them that all things move in harmony. They did not rush it, nor fear it, nor try to hold it still. They accepted its turning as part of themselves, just as rivers accepted gravity and leaves accepted the wind. The turning of time was the heartbeat of creation, steady and unbroken. And as they looked upon the world, the stars above, the rivers below, the quiet faces of their companions, they understood the deepest truth of all. Time does not pass. It circles, and in its circle, everything endures. And so, as the sun rose on another morning 1 million years ago, the earth awakened again, as it had for billions of mornings before, and as it still does now. The light spread slowly, washing over mountains, rivers, forests, and plains, revealing the quiet perfection of a living planet in motion. Dew sparkled on blades of grass like tiny stars fallen from the night. Mist curled along valleys, dissolving as warmth returned. The air shimmered faintly, touched by birdsong and the rustle of waking life. Everything moved as if in rhythm with an invisible breath, clouds drifting, trees swaying, waves folding against the shore. The world was not young, yet it was endlessly new. Every sunrise was rebirth, every shadow a memory. Humanity, still small and scattered, was part of this awakening, walking through it, breathing it, unknowingly carrying its rhythm within. Their hearts. They did not yet call themselves caretakers, but they were already listening, already learning, already connected to the living pulse that surrounded them. The planet itself seemed aware of its children. It turned beneath their feet, offering them soil and shelter, water and warmth. It had shaped them from its own dust, taught them through its storms, and cradled them through its seasons. They, in turn, reflected it, their eyes holding the sky's color, their blood carrying the salt of ancient seas, their bones formed from the same minerals that built the mountains. The line between earth and human did not yet exist. They were one continuous thing, breathing the same breath, sharing the same heartbeat. Every step they took echoed through the soil, every fire mirrored the sun, every whisper joined the wind. To live was not to stand apart, but to participate in the great unfolding of creation. Even their dreams belonged to the world, born from the hum of rivers and the flicker of stars. They were not conquerors or observers. They were extensions of the earth's awareness, its way of knowing itself through eyes, hands, and thought. As the ages turned, glaciers would come and go, forests would rise and fall, seas would advance and retreat. Species would vanish, others would bloom. Continents would drift like slow ships upon the molten heart of the world. Yet through all these transformations, one truth would remain. The planet endures. It remembers. The echoes of those ancient footsteps still hum beneath the surface, faint but eternal. The air we breathe has passed through 1 million lungs, animal, human, leaf, and wave. The water we drink has fallen as rain upon the backs of mammoths, has flowed through the roots of forgotten forests, has frozen and melted countless times in the endless dance of renewal. The soil beneath us carries the dust of stars, the ashes of volcanoes, and the traces of lives long gone. The earth is not past or future, it is continuous. Its memory lives in everything that breathes. And if one stands still, even now, and listens carefully, the same song can still be heard. The voice of the wind moving through trees, the murmur of rivers, the soft rhythm of waves against the shore. It is quieter now, hidden beneath the hum of the modern world, but it has never stopped. The earth still whispers its ancient story, patient and unwavering, waiting for us to remember. It reminds us that we are not separate from it, that its heartbeat still echoes within our own. The same light that once touched the faces of those first wanderers still touches us today. The same moon watches from above. The same stars burn with the same silent promise. The earth has never truly changed, only our place upon it has. It turns as it always has, slowly, endlessly, beautifully alive. And if we are quiet enough, if we breathe deeply and listen as our ancestors once did, we can still hear it. The soft, eternal whisper of a world that dreams of itself through us.